Victor Crow didn't knock. He never did. He pushed open the door of the Black Pine Valley Land Office on a Tuesday morning in December of 1889 and dropped a folded document onto the clerk's desk, hard enough to make the ink bottles rattle. Clerk, a thin man named Aldous Ferry, who had worked that desk for 11 years without once raising his voice, looked up and immediately looked back down. "File it," Victor said. Aldous unfolded the paper. His hands slowed as he read it. "Mr. Crow, this is the Whitmore water easement. You can't just—" "I just did." Victor pulled out his pocket watch, checked it without really looking at it, and snapped it shut. Elias Whitmore defaulted on the third installment of his note. That easement transfers to the holding company at default. It's in the contract he signed. File it before noon, or I'll find someone who will. Aldous looked up one more time. He was not a brave man. He filed it. By sundown, every family in Black Pine Valley knew that Elias Whitmore had lost his water. What they didn't know yet, what Victor had very carefully kept from becoming common knowledge, was that the contract Elias had signed contained a clause written in language so dense and layered that even a trained lawyer might have read past it twice. Clause that transferred the easement, not only at default, but at any restructuring of household composition, deemed materially fraudulent by the note holder. Victor had written that clause himself. He'd been waiting 8 months to use it. And now a woman had stepped off a train at Gallatin Crossing who was not the woman on the passenger manifest, and Victor Crow had everything he needed. If you have ever watched someone lose everything they spent a lifetime building, if you have ever stood at the edge of something and felt the ground give way beneath you, then you already know what this story is about before it begins. Stay with it. Because what happens in Black Pine Valley in the winter of 1889 is not a story about defeat. It is a story about what rises up when defeat seems certain. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story to its end. You will not want to miss what comes next. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it started. The train from Billings arrived 40 minutes late, which was not unusual for December, and Elias Whitmore had been standing on the platform at Gallatin Crossing for over an hour by the time it pulled in. He was 41 years old and looked closer to 50. Cold had a way of doing that to men in Montana, pressing years into their faces, drawing the skin tight over bone, leaving something weathered and distant in the eyes that people sometimes mistook for wisdom. In Elias's case, it was mostly exhaustion. He had a letter in his coat pocket. He'd read it so many times the fold lines were soft as cloth. It was from a woman named Caroline Marsh, a schoolteacher from Columbus, Ohio, who had agreed through a placement agency to come west as a bride. Her letters had been practical, not romantic. She wrote about what she could cook, what she knew about livestock, whether she was afraid of cold weather. She was not afraid of cold weather, she said. She had grown up in northern Ohio and knew what winters meant. Elias had not expected to feel much reading those letters. He'd told himself this was a practical arrangement. His wife Margaret had been dead 3 years. His daughter Lily was 7 and had started going quiet in ways that worried him. The ranch needed 2 people to run it properly, and he could not afford to hire another hand. A wife made sense. It wasn't romantic, and it wasn't supposed to be. But he'd read those letters more times than he could account for, and standing there on the platform with frozen mud on his boots and ice at the edge of the water trough, he understood that some part of him had started hoping. He didn't examine that too closely. He just watched the train doors. The first passengers off were a family father, mother, 3 children bundled to the point of shapelessness. Then 2 men in wool coats with the look of cattle buyers about them. Then an older woman with a hat box. Then no one for a long moment, long enough that Elias shifted his weight and told himself to stop it. She was probably just slow getting her things together. Then a woman stepped off the train, who was not Caroline Marsh. He knew immediately. He had a photograph of Caroline oval face, light hair, a certain arrangement of features that was pleasant if unremarkable. The woman who stepped onto the platform had dark hair pulled back severely under a plain hat, and her face was narrower, sharper at the jaw, with eyes that went to him directly and did not look away. She was carrying a trunk herself. It was not large, but it was heavy by the way she carried it, and she had not asked anyone to help her. She set it down on the platform boards and stood up straight and looked at Elias for another moment, and then she said, "You're Mr. Whitmore." It was not a question. "I am," he said. "I'm not Caroline Marsh." She said it the same way someone else might say the train was late. Directly, no apology yet, just the fact of it, offered plainly. My name is Elena Voss. I was on the same train as Miss Marsh as far as Fargo. She didn't continue past Fargo. She left the agency's ticket at the station counter and took a coach north. I don't know where she was going. Elias stood there with the cold, working through his coat, and tried to process what she'd said. She left, he said. Yes, she just left. She told the station master she changed her mind. Elena paused. I don't think she told him anything else. I only know because I was sitting near the counter when she returned the ticket. And he stopped, looked at the trunk, looked at her. Why are you here? Why did you get off this train? Because I had nowhere else to go, she said. And because I thought you deserved to know in person, rather than getting a letter in 6 weeks, when the agency finally writes to tell you she didn't come. Elias Whitmore was not a man who showed a great deal on his face. His neighbors would have told you he was hard to read on a good day. But something moved through him in that moment, some combination of disappointment and exhaustion, and something he couldn't name, and he turned away from her and looked at the empty tracks for a long moment. He had spent his last liquid money on that agency fee, the train fare, the room he'd prepared. He had no way to bring another woman from the east. He had no way to do much of anything, except go back to the ranch and figure out what came next. Turn back. Elena Voss was still standing there. She hadn't moved, hadn't shifted into some posture of expectation or pleading. She just stood with her hands folded in front of her and waited. And there was something in the stillness of it, the patience that made him look at her more carefully than he had the first time. What were you doing on that train, he said. Leaving, she said. From where? She considered how much to say. He could see her doing it. Minneapolis. I'd been working in a dry goods warehouse for 3 years. The owner sold the business in November. New owners brought their own people. She paused. I have a sister in Portland. I was going to try to reach her. You have no money, he said, not unkindly, just reading what was in front of him. I have $14 and some change. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he heard something, a light sound, half word and half breath, from somewhere near his left side, and he looked down. Lily had come with him to the station. He'd tried to leave her with the Hendersons next door, but she'd stood in the yard in her coat without speaking until he relented and brought her along. She did that sometimes, just stood and waited until he gave in. She was 7 years old and already knew things about patience that most adults forgot. She was looking up at Elena Voss with an expression Elias couldn't quite read. Elena looked down at her. Hello, she said. Lily said nothing. What's your name? Still nothing. Lily looked at her father, then back at the woman. She doesn't talk much to strangers, Elias said. That's all right, Elena said. She didn't push it. Didn't crouch down and perform warmth the way some people did with children, that exaggerated brightness that children always saw through. She just acknowledged Lily's silence as a reasonable response and looked back at Elias. That was when Lily said, Do you know how to braid hair? Elias blinked. Elena looked at the girl again. I do, she said. Is that important? Papa can't, Lily said. He tries, but it falls out. Elena glanced at Elias, and he saw something move across her face, not pity, not amusement. Something more careful than either. I'll bet he tries hard, though. Lily considered this seriously. Then she reached out and took Elena's hand. Not asking permission, not hesitating. Just took it. The way children sometimes decide things for themselves before the adults have caught up. Elias looked at his daughter's hand in the hand of this stranger and felt something break open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 3 years. Picked up Elena's trunk. My wagon's out front, he said. It's a long ride. He didn't say much on the drive back. Elena didn't seem to require him to. She sat in the wagon seat with Lily between them and looked at the country as it opened up around them, the pine forests and the frozen creek beds, and the mountains going gray in the early dark, and she asked him once how long he'd had the ranch. 15 years, he said. Your wife, she stopped. I'm sorry. I don't know how much is my business. Her name was Margaret. She died of pneumonia 3 years ago, February, and you've been running it alone since then. Tried to, he said, which was honest. He had tried. Cattle numbers were down by half, and the east fence line had been failing since September, and he'd been putting off the bank in Gallatin Crossing for 2 months, because he knew what Crow was going to say and didn't want to hear it yet. What kind of ranch, Elena said. Cattle, mostly. Some crops. We have water rights on the eastern creek. It's about the most valuable thing left on the property. Victor Crow's been after them for 2 years. She absorbed this. Who's Victor Crow? Man who owns the Black Pine Valley Bank. About half the land in the valley he doesn't own outright, he holds notes on. Elias kept his eyes on the road. He made me an offer on the water rights in October. Didn't take it. What happened when you didn't take it? He smiled, Elias said. Made me nervous then. Makes me more nervous now. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what was the offer? $1,200 for permanent easement. And what are the rights actually worth? He glanced at her sideways. Why do you know to ask that? I worked in a warehouse, she said. Before that I worked in the office of a land surveyor in St. Paul for 2 years. Leases and easements were part of what I cataloged. Elias was quiet for a full minute. They're worth $4,000 to $6,000, he said, with the valley growing the way it is. Then he offered you a fifth of market value and expected you to be grateful. That's about right. She looked back out at the dark trees. What's he going to try next? Elias didn't answer right away, but he thought about the letter he'd gotten from the bank 3 weeks ago, the one about the loan restructuring clause he'd signed 2 years back when he was desperate and not reading carefully. He thought about the way Crow had phrased it, all the language about composition of household and material representation. He'd signed it because he needed the extension. He hadn't understood what he was signing fully. He understood it better now. I don't know yet, he said, which was not quite true. The ranch looked worse at night than it did in daylight. In daylight, you could at least see what had survived. The main cabin still stood solid. The barn was in reasonable repair. The creek was there if you looked east. At night, the broken fence line was invisible, but the emptiness pressed in, the sense of how much had gone quiet that used to be noise and movement and life. Elena walked through the cabin door and stopped. He watched her take it in the cold. The sparse furnishings, the bunk in the corner where Lily slept with a quilt Margaret had made, the hook by the door where Margaret's coat had hung, until Elias finally made himself take it down 1.5 years ago. The table with its 2 chairs and the little stool Lily used, because there wasn't a third chair the right size. He expected her to say something polite, something careful. It needs work, she said instead. Yes, the chimney draw's wrong. That's why it's cold in here, even with the fire. He looked at the fireplace. Can you tell? The smoke's going the wrong direction inside the flue. It's a baffle problem, probably. Not expensive to fix. She set down the bag she was carrying and looked at the stove. Is there food? There was corn, some dried beans, a portion of salted pork, 3 potatoes that needed to be used soon. He told her this, and she nodded and went to the stove like she'd been cooking in that kitchen for years, which she had not. And the first problem she encountered was that the damper handle was broken. Pliers, she said. He found her a pair. She fixed the damper with 3 twists and lit the stove, and within 20 minutes the temperature in the cabin was noticeably different. He didn't say anything about it. He wasn't sure what to say. Lily sat at the table and watched Elena cook, with an attention she usually reserved for things that interested her deeply, the way the creek moved after rain, the horses when they were nervous. She watched Elena's hands. She watched the way Elena moved between the stove and the counter, without hesitation. You're not scared, Lily said. Elena looked over at her. Of what? Of the ranch. Mrs. Henderson said a city woman would be scared. I'm not from the city, Elena said. I'm from a farm in Wisconsin. I didn't leave it until I was 22. What's Wisconsin like? Cold, Elena said, and flat. I like the mountains better. Even though they're scary? Things can be scary and worth looking at, Elena said. That's usually how you know they're real. Lily thought about this for a while. Elias sat at the table and pretended to look at nothing in particular. After dinner, which was better than anything he'd made in months, he told Elena about the sleeping arrangements. He had 1 bedroom. Lily had her bunk in the main room. He'd put his bedroll in the barn for as long as needed, until they figured out what they were doing. I'll take the barn, Elena said. You will not, Mr. Whitmore, you need your rest more than I do. I've slept in worse than barns. I'm not going to argue about it. He said it firmly enough that she stopped. You'll take the bedroom. Lily's bunk is in here where it's warm. I know how to sleep in a barn. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, all right. He was halfway out the door when she said, why did you bring me here? He didn't turn around. Because Lily took your hand, he said. And I haven't seen her do that since Margaret died. He went to the barn and lay on the hay with his hands behind his head and stared at the darkness and did not sleep for a long time. The news moved through Black Pine Valley, the way news always moved there on horseback, through open windows, across church steps and store counters. By Wednesday, 3 days after Elias brought Elena home from the station, there were already 2 versions of the story. The first version was sympathetic. in the way valley gossip was sometimes sympathetic to people before it turned on them. Elias Whitmore had paid for a bride from the East, and something had gone wrong, and now he had a strange woman living on his property, and no one quite knew what to make of it. The second version, which moved faster, was not sympathetic at all. Nora Alcott spread it at the dry goods counter on Thursday morning, which was the most efficient distribution point in the valley. Nora Alcott was 56 years old and had outlasted 2 husbands and 1 business and knew everything about everyone in a 10-mile radius. She did not spread rumors carelessly, she curated them. The woman is an imposter, she told the 4 people within hearing distance. She took someone else's ticket and passed herself off as the bride Elias ordered. Now she's living in that ranch house, and no one's done a thing about it. Clara Boone, who was 18 and worked the counter, said, "That doesn't sound exactly right, Nora. The way I heard it." "The way you heard it from who?" Clara did not say from who, because she had heard it from her brother, who'd heard it from Elias directly. But she also knew better than to argue with Nora Alcott in the middle of the store. By Friday, the story had reached Victor Crow. He heard it from his clerk, Patterson, who told it badly no detail, just the outline. Victor made Patterson tell it again. Slower, then he sat at his desk for a while and thought. The water rights easement clause was already filed. Technically, it required a formal finding of material fraud to activate. That was the one piece of process he hadn't been able to skip. He'd been trying to think of a way to manufacture the finding without making it look manufactured, which was the kind of problem that required the right situation rather than the right money. And now Elias Whitmore had a woman living in his house who was not the woman on the agency contract. Victor smiled the smile his clerk Patterson had learned to dread, quiet, almost gentle, the smile of a man who has just seen the last piece of a long game come into place. He sent a letter to the county land office that afternoon. Elias didn't know about the letter for another week. In that week, things happened on the ranch that would not have happened without Elena, and he was aware of this in the way you're aware of a change in weather, not dramatically, not all at once, just a gradual recognition that something was different from what it had been. She found the east fence failure on her second day. He'd been putting off fixing it because it required pulling and replacing nearly 30 yards of posts in frozen ground, and he couldn't do it alone. She didn't ask him about it. She found the post pounder in the barn and started pulling the bad posts herself, working in the kind of cold that turned breath to fog and made hands useless inside of 20 minutes. He came out and found her working and didn't say anything for a moment. "You'll hurt your hands," he said. "They're already cold. Might as well be useful." He got his tools. They worked the fence together for 3 days. She didn't complain. She didn't perform hardship for his benefit, didn't sigh or grimace or ask how much longer. She just worked, and when her hands got too cold, she put them in her armpits for a minute and then went back to work. On the second day, she found the calf. It was in the far corner of the south pasture, half hidden under a fallen branch, one of the last of the fall calves. He'd lost track of it in the chaos of the week and hadn't done a full count since before the station. It was alive, but barely cold-sick and too weak to stand properly. He would have found it in another day or 2, he told himself. Probably. Elena carried it back to the barn herself, which was not a small thing. It weighed nearly 40 pounds, and the walk was a quarter-mile through snow. He set it down in the stall, packed hay around it, and spent that evening getting something warm into it a little at a time. Lily helped without being asked. By morning, the calf was standing. "You've done this before," Elias said. "Wisconsin," she said. "We had cattle. You didn't mention that. You didn't ask." He hadn't. He'd been too busy being wary of her to be curious, and he recognized that now as a kind of foolishness he couldn't quite forgive himself for. "What else didn't I ask?" he said. She thought about it. "I can read a surveyor's plot. I know the basic principles of water law in territory states. I can set a broken bone if it's a clean break, and I can make better cornbread than what you've been eating." She said the last part without particular emphasis, but he heard the accuracy in it. "Cornbread's been bad," he admitted. "Yes," she agreed. There was a moment between them that might have been something if either of them had been ready for it. But they weren't. They were both too cautious, too marked by previous losses, and so the moment passed into the ordinary work of the afternoon, and neither of them mentioned it. It was Lily who first noticed that something was wrong. She noticed because she was a child who had learned to read adults, the way adults sometimes forgot children could. She noticed the way the men from the land office came to the ranch on a Thursday in the third week and stood at the door talking to her father in a way that was polite on the surface and not polite underneath. She noticed the way her father's face went flat and careful. She noticed how he kept his hands very still at his sides the way he did when he was trying not to show what he felt. She told Elena that night. Elena was in the cabin checking the accounts. Elias had asked her to look at them 3 days ago, handed her the ledger with a kind of relieved exhaustion, and she'd been going through them systematically. Lily came and stood beside her and said, "Something happened today." "Tell me," Elena said. Lily told her about the men. Elena listened without moving. "Did you hear what they said to your father?" "Something about a contract. And a name. The name of the woman he sent for." Elena set down her pen. She was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. "Go to sleep. We'll figure it out." Lily looked at her. "Are you in trouble?" "Maybe," Elena said honestly. She reached out and straightened the collar of the girl's nightshirt, a small, practical gesture. "But trouble has a way of passing when you don't run from it. Go to sleep, Lily." Lily went to her bunk. She lay there listening to the scratch of Elena's pen resuming on the ledger paper, and the sound of it was steady enough that she fell asleep before she meant to. Elena sat up for another 2 hours after that. She was looking at the accounts, but she was also thinking. She was thinking about a contract, and a water easement, and a man named Crow, who offered less than a fifth of fair value and smiled when the offer was declined. She was thinking about what it meant that the men from the land office had come at exactly this time, not when she first arrived, not after a few days, but now, 3 weeks in, when she was embedded enough in the household to be useful as a weapon. That was not coincidence, she thought. That was patience. She knew something about patience. She'd been using it for 34 years. She turned to a fresh page in the ranch ledger and began making notes. Elias told her about it himself the next morning. Came in from the barn early, while the stove was still warming, and he sat down at the table and put both hands flat surface and looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "I got a notice from the land office," he said. "Victor Crow filed a claim on the water easement. He's saying there's a fraud clause in the loan contract I signed. Says if there's any material misrepresentation in the household composition, it triggers the easement transfer." Elena sat across from him, and he's saying I'm the misrepresentation. "You're not on the agency contract. Caroline Marsh is." He's going to argue that I misrepresented the household by bringing in a woman who isn't who I paid for, even though you didn't know I was coming. Even though he looked at her. The clause is real. I read it last night after they left. It's buried in about 400 words of loan language, but it's real. I should have caught it. "When did you sign the original note?" 2 years ago, February. 3 weeks after Margaret died. Elena was quiet. "That's when you signed it," she said. Yes. She thought about a man 3 weeks out from losing his wife, sitting across a desk from Victor Crow and signing what was put in front of him, because he needed the money and wasn't reading carefully and was running on grief and no sleep. She thought about what kind of person writes a clause like that into a loan document offered to a man in that condition. "What happens if he wins the claim?" she said. "The water easement transfers to his holding company. Without water, the east pasture dries up. Without the east pasture, I can't run enough cattle to service the loan. Without servicing the loan, he stopped. He gets the ranch. The whole ranch, the whole ranch." The fire crackled. Outside, Lily was making some small sound in the yard, talking to one of the barn cats, probably. "She did that in the morning." "I can leave," Elena said. "If I leave and you tell the land office it was a misunderstanding, maybe it takes the ground out from under him." Elias looked at her steadily. "And then what?" "You're $14 and some change to the good and 1,000 miles from Portland. I've been in worse positions." "I imagine you have," he said. "But that's not what I'm asking." She waited. "I'm asking if you want to stay," he said. "Not because I need your help, although I do. Because you've been here 3 weeks and my daughter has started talking again, and the accounts make sense for the first time in 2 years, and the east fence is fixed." He paused. "I'm not good at saying these things. Margaret always told me I say everything sideways." "You're saying it directly enough," Elena said. "Then I'll say it straight. You can go if you want to go. That's your right. But if you stay, I'll stand beside you when Crow pushes. That's not nothing in this valley." She looked at him for a long moment. He met it without looking away, which was not always easy when someone was really looking at you. "All right," she said. "All right, you'll stay?" "All right, I'll stay," she said. "And all right, you'll stand beside me. We should probably be clear on both parts. Something that was almost a smile moved across his face. It was brief and complicated, and she stored it away without mentioning it. "What do we do first?" he said. "First," she said, "you tell me everything about that loan document. Every clause. Every word you remember. Because I think what Crow wrote in there may not be as solid as he thinks it is, and I want to know before he does." Turn to a fresh page. He told her everything. The first hearing at the Gallatin County Land Office was set for January 14th, 3 weeks away. Elias had not hired a lawyer, because the lawyer in Gallatin Crossing was a man named Horace Penfield, who had done business with Victor Crow for 15 years and had no particular interest in changing that arrangement. The next nearest lawyer was in Billings, which was a full day's ride, which cost money Elias didn't have. "We may not need a lawyer," Elena said the evening after he told her about the hearing date. They were at the table with the loan document spread between them. She'd gotten it from Elias's strongbox. The original, all 4 pages of it in Crow's clerk's small, careful handwriting. She had pencils and had been marking sections quietly for the better part of an hour. "You found something," Elias said. It wasn't a question. Possibly, she tapped the page. "This clause, the household composition clause, uses the phrase material misrepresentation. That's a legal term with a specific meaning. For something to be material misrepresentation, the party making the statement has to have known it was false at the time they made it." Elias looked at the page. "You were already on the train when I signed this. Caroline Marsh was already contracted. You couldn't have misrepresented your household composition because you didn't know the composition had changed." She looked at him. "You signed the loan 2 years ago. Caroline Marsh only abandoned the arrangement 6 weeks ago. The timeline alone may be enough." He was quiet for a moment. "Crow's lawyer will argue something else, probably. But if we can get the timing on record before he reships the argument, we put him on defense." She looked back at the document. "There's something else." "What?" This clause was not in the standard note template used by territorial banks in 1887. I've seen those templates. I cataloged them for 2 years in St. Paul. She pointed to a paragraph. This language was written specifically for this document. Someone drafted it after the fact and inserted it. Elias read the paragraph slowly. "How do you know it wasn't original?" "The ink," she said. "Look at this section compared to the rest. The rest is consistent, same pressure, same flow. This section is slightly darker. Someone used a different pen, or the same pen with fresher ink. Paper fibers are also slightly raised under this block of text, which means it was written over an erasure." He looked at the page more carefully. "You can see that," he said. "I worked with original documents for 2 years, she said. "You learn to see it." He sat back. Outside, the wind was up, pushing against the cabin walls with a low, insistent pressure. He looked at the woman across the table from him, this person he hadn't expected, hadn't prepared for, hadn't known what to do with when she arrived, and felt something settle in him. Not hope exactly. He was too old for easy hope. But something close to it, in the way that a fire sometimes looks like hope from far enough away. "We're going to need that original in front of a judge," he said. "Yes. Victor Crow has the county judge in his pocket. Then we need a different judge." She looked at him steadily. "Is there a way to request that the hearing be elevated to district court?" He thought about it. "If we file a claim of contract fraud, rather than just defending the easement action, a fraud claim would go to district court by right. Then that's what we file," she said. He looked at her. "You understand what that does? It turns a land dispute into an accusation. Against Victor Crow in Black Pine Valley." "Yes," she said. "He'll come at us hard." "He was already coming at us hard," Elena said. "The difference is now we're going toward him, instead of waiting for him to arrive." Elias looked at his hands on the table. Then he looked up. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They had 3 weeks. They filed the fraud claim on a Monday morning, which meant riding into Gallatin Crossing in weather that had dropped overnight to somewhere below what a reasonable man would call survivable. Elias drove the wagon. Elena sat beside him with the original loan document wrapped in oilcloth inside her coat, pressed against her body to keep the paper from getting damp. Lily stayed with the Hendersons, which she accepted without argument, which told Elias she understood something serious was happening without having been told directly. The district court clerk was a man named Ira Stokes, who was neither Crow's man nor anyone else's man. In particular, he was simply a clerk who had been doing his job for 14 years and intended to keep doing it until he could retire to somewhere warmer. He read the filing Elena had prepared the night before, looked up at them once over the top of it, looked back down, and read it again. This is a fraud claim against Victor Crow, he said. Yes, Elias said. You understand what that means in terms of who hears it. District Judge, Elena said, not county. Stokes looked at her. He hadn't addressed the question to her specifically, but she'd answered it, and he seemed to be deciding how he felt about that. He was a careful man, not a cruel one. Judge Alderman is in Billings until the 20th, he said. Hearing won't be before the 22nd at earliest. That's fine, Elias said. Stokes stamped the filing, made 2 copies, handed one back. You'll want to serve Crow's office before end of day, he said. Otherwise his lawyer will argue insufficient notice. How do we serve him? Elena said. Sheriff's office, 2 doors down. Stokes looked at her again, something shifting slightly in his assessment. You've done legal paperwork before some, she said. He nodded once, slowly, and said nothing else. They went to the sheriff's office and served the notice, and by noon Victor Crow knew they were coming at him instead of running. They were halfway back to the ranch when Elias said, He's going to move fast now. I know, Elena said. He has people in this valley who will do what he asks without knowing why he's asking. I know that too. The road curved through a section of pine that blocked the wind and made the cold slightly more manageable. The horses moved without being pushed, knowing the way home. Are you scared? He said. She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. But I've been scared before and it didn't kill me. What scared you before? He said. It came out more direct than he intended, and he felt it immediately, the overstep of it. But she didn't pull back. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the road. My father, she said, he drank. Not every day, but enough. My mother figured out how to read the particular silence before it got bad, and she taught me. I got very good at watching for it. She paused. Victor Crow has that same silence. That specific stillness of a man who's decided something and is waiting for the right moment. Elias looked at her profile. You saw it when you met him? I haven't met him yet, she said. I saw it in the way he wrote that clause. Thought about that for a long time, without saying anything. Victor Crow's response came faster than either of them expected. It came not through the court and not through his lawyer, but through the community itself, which was the more efficient channel when you had lived somewhere long enough and held enough notes on enough properties to understand how information and obligation moved together through a small valley. Started at the Hendersons. Owen Henderson had a note with Crow's bank on his south parcel, had held it for 6 years and serviced it without incident. But the previous October he'd been 2 weeks late on a payment because his wife had been sick, and the payment had slipped. Crow's bank had extended him without penalty, which Owen had been quietly grateful for. He had not fully understood until now that the extension was not generosity. It was a reservation. Owen came to the ranch on a Wednesday evening, 3 days after the filing, and stood at the door with his hat in his hands and the look of a man who had been told to do something he wasn't sure he could do. Elias let him in. Elena was at the table with the ledger, closed it, and set it aside, which was a courtesy she offered to everyone who came to the ranch. She had a way of making whatever she was working on disappear so the visitor didn't feel like an interruption. Owen didn't sit. He stood with his hat and turned it in his hands and looked at Elias. Can't testify, he said. I know you were going to ask me. Elias was still. I wasn't going to ask you. You might have eventually. Owen glanced at Elena, then back. I heard what you filed. I heard you might need people who can speak to Crow's way of doing business. He stopped. I have 5 children, Elias. I know that. He called in Henderson's crossing note last year on Alton Mears with 48 hours' notice. Alton lost the parcel. His family. Owen stopped again. I can't. I understand, Elias said. I'm sorry, he meant it. That was the worst part. You could see it on him. The shame and the sorrow and the calculation underneath. And all 3 of those things were real. I'm sorry, Elena, he said to her. I know, she said. She said it without edge, without contempt. She looked at him like a person who had made the same kind of calculation before and knew what it cost, and wasn't going to pretend it didn't. Owen left. Lily, who had been awake in her bunk though she was supposed to be sleeping, was very quiet. Elias sat down at the table. He put his elbows on it and his face in his hands for a moment, just a moment, and then he took his hands away and looked at the ceiling. He's going to pressure everyone we might call, he said. Yes, Elena said, which means we need evidence instead of witnesses. We have the document, she said, with the altered clause. A document isn't enough by itself. We need someone who can testify to what original banknote templates looked like in this territory in 1887. Someone who knows the standard language and can say this clause wasn't in it. Elena was already thinking about it. There are territorial banking records, she said, filed with the Land Commission office in Helena. Standard form contracts are submitted as part of the bank's licensing documentation. If Crow's Bank used a different form for my loan document, then it's submitted to Helena. That's evidence of fraud, Elias said. That's evidence of fraud, she confirmed. He looked at her. Helena is 3 days' ride, I know. The hearing is in 12 days. I know, who goes, he said. Not rhetorically. An actual question. She looked back at him steadily. I go, she said. You stay. Lily needs someone here, and someone needs to tend the stock. If we both leave, the ranch is empty and Crow will know it. I'm not sending you to Helena alone. You're not sending me anywhere, she said. And there was nothing combative in it, just a correction of language. I'm choosing to go. He was quiet. He didn't like it, and he didn't pretend otherwise. The roads between here and Helena in January are bad, she said. I know that too. Elena. Elias. She said his name back to him with the same weight he'd used, and he heard that she was not going to be moved on this. There was a difference between stubbornness and clarity, and she had the second one. I'm the one who can read those records when I get there. I'm the one who knows what to look for. If you go, you'd need someone to walk you through it, and there's no time. He sat with this for a long moment. Then, take the bay mare. She's more reliable in snow. All right, she said. Enough money for the road. I'll get it from the strong box. All right. He stood up, stopped. You'll come back, he said, and then seemed to realize how that had come out not commanding, just something closer to asking, and that surprised him as much as her. Yes, she said, I'll come back. Lily's voice came from the bunk, quiet and deliberate. She said she would. Neither adult said anything to this. Elias went to the strong box. Elena looked at her notes. She left before light the next morning. Elias had the mare saddled, and her saddlebags packed. He'd done it the night before, insisting on it in the particular stubborn way he had that was easier to accept than fight. He'd put dried meat and hardtack and 2 extra pairs of wool socks in one bag and the oilcloth-wrapped original loan document in the other. She had her own copies of everything she needed, folded in the interior pocket of her coat. Lily was awake to see her off, sitting on the top porch step wrapped in her quilt, watching. Elena stopped in front of her. I'll be back in 7 days, she said. 8 at the outside. I know, Lily said. While I'm gone, you're in charge of checking the calf's water in the morning before your father does, so he doesn't have to do it while he's feeding the horses. Lily considered this seriously, understanding it for what it was, a real task, not a made-up one to make her feel useful. Okay, she said. Don't let your father eat the dried beans without soaking them first, Elena said. He won't soak them. Remind him. Something moved in Lily's face that might have been the beginning of a smile. He never soaks them, she said. I know. Elena looked at her for a moment. Lily looked back. Come back, Lily said. The same words her father had used, but in a different key, not a request, almost an instruction. Yes, Lena said. She mounted the mare and rode north into the dark. She was gone for 6 days, not 7. The Helena trip was not easy, and she did not pretend it was. The roads were what January roads in Montana always were, which was essentially organized punishment. She made it in 2.5 days, because she rode longer than was smart each of those days. Arriving at the Territorial Banking Commission's records office on the morning of the 3rd day, with mud on her coat and her hands stiff from the cold in ways that took an hour to fully work out. Clerk at the records office was named Beaumont, and he had the mildly suspicious demeanor of a man whose entire function was keeping other people away from things. He looked at Elena's request. She'd written it out in full, so he couldn't reinterpret it, and looked at her and said it would take 3 to 5 business days to locate the relevant filing documentation. I have 2 days, Elena said. Ma'am, the archive is mine. What section of the archive would a bank's standard form contracts be in? Beaumont blinked. Section C, commercial lending. But those files are filed by bank name and year of licensing application or by county of operation. Stared at her. Bank name, he said slowly. Then I can find it myself if you'll give me access to Section C. She looked at him without aggression, without charm, just directly. I know how to handle archival documents. I worked in a land surveyor's office for 2 years. I will not damage anything. Beaumont considered her for a long moment. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had rules and also the capacity, under sufficient specificity, to see around them. 1 hour, he said. And you take nothing out of the room. She found the Crow Banking Commission, filing in 40 minutes. Standard form note contract submitted by Black Pine Valley Bank in 1886, as required for territorial licensing, was 3 pages. Contained no household composition clause. It contained no language about material misrepresentation. The lending sections were clean, standard 7 paragraphs of ordinary loan terms. She made careful notes of every detail, page numbers, file reference numbers, the name of the licensing inspector who'd signed off on it. She wrote down the exact language of each corresponding section so she could hold them side by side against what Crow had put in Elias's loan document. She left Beaumont's office and went directly to the district court in Helena and asked to speak with whoever handled documentary evidence submissions. An hour later, she had submitted certified copies of the relevant commission, filing the real one, the one without the fabricated clause, as evidence in the pending district court case out of Gallatin County. Then she rode home. The valley looked different when she came back. It took her a moment to understand why, and then she understood. She had been thinking of it as something to return to, and until you think of a place that way, it's just geography. Came over the rise above Whitmore Ranch in the late afternoon of the 6th day, and saw the smoke from the chimney and the light in the window, and the small figure in the yard that was Lily, standing there in her coat, looking up the hill like she'd been looking for a while. Elias came out of the barn. He walked across the yard and stopped at the fence and looked at her on the horse and didn't say anything for a moment. "You're back," he said. "I told you I would be, I know." He opened the fence gate. His voice was even, but his hands on the gate latch were not entirely steady. "Did you find it?" "I found it," she said. "The original template has nothing. No household clause, no material misrepresentation language. It's not in the form he submitted for licensing." Something happened in Elias's face. It wasn't relief exactly, too complicated for that. Too much still ahead. But some of the particular tension that had been living in him since the land office men came to the door shifted. "It'll be enough," he said. "It'll be enough to put the question in front of a judge," she said. "That's all we need." Lily had reached her by then and taken hold of her coat sleeve. Not hard, just enough. Elena looked down at her. "I soaked the beans," Lily said. "How did they come out?" "Better," Lily said. "He said it didn't matter." "He's wrong," Elena said. Elias almost smiled. It was the almost smile she was beginning to recognize, the one that didn't quite make it all the way, that stopped just short like a man stepping up to a door and not going through. "Come inside," he said. "It's cold." She came inside. It was warm. The chimney was drawing correctly. She'd fixed the baffle in the first week, and it had held, and there was something on the stove that smelled like Lily had been involved in making it, which meant it would be sincere, if not technically accomplished. She sat at the table, and Lily sat across from her, and Elias put coffee on without being asked, and the three of them sat in the warmth of the cabin, and Elena told them what she'd found in Helena in enough detail that they all understood what was coming. Crow's countermove came on a Friday, 5 days before the hearing. Elias was in the barn when Patterson, Crow's clerk, rode up to the property line and stopped there, not coming in, just stopping at the edge, which was a specific kind of message about where he stood. Elias came out and walked to the fence. Patterson was a slight man, pale even in summer, who carried the permanent expression of someone who knew too much about his employer's business and had long since decided that knowing things was worse than not knowing them. He held a folded paper. "Mr. Crow asks me to deliver this," he said, and held it out over the fence. Elias took it, unfolded it. "Read it twice." "What is it?" Elena said. She'd come out of the cabin when she saw Patterson ride up. Elias handed it to her. It was not a legal document. It was a letter, written in Crow's own hand. She knew it was his hand because she'd seen his signature on the loan document, and the handwriting matched. It was addressed to Elias, and it said, in language that was very careful and almost gentle, that the easement claim was entirely driven by legal obligation, not personal animosity, that Crow had great respect for Elias Whitmore as a neighbor and a rancher, that the situation could still be resolved without a district court hearing and the attendant unpleasantness for everyone involved, that his offer of $1,200 for the water easement remained open, and that, given the complexity of the household situation and Miss Voss's involvement, there was an alternative arrangement available. If Elena Voss agreed to leave the valley voluntarily before the hearing date, Crow would withdraw the easement claim and forgive the remaining balance on the loan. She read it twice. Then she folded it and held it. Patterson was watching her. "Mr. Crow hopes you'll consider the offer seriously," he said. "Tell Mr. Crow I've considered it," she said, and she handed the letter back across the fence. "Tell him no." Patterson took the letter. He looked at her for a moment with that expression of a man who carries information he'd rather not, and then he looked at Elias. "This will go badly for you," he said, and he didn't say it with relish. He said it like a man reading a weather report. It already has, Elias said. We're still here. Patterson rode away. Elias and Elena stood at the fence until he was out of sight. He's scared, she said. Elias looked at her. Crow? He wouldn't offer to forgive the loan balance if he wasn't scared. That's a significant concession. She looked at where Patterson had gone. He knows about the Helena records. Someone in the district clerk's office told him, or he found out another way. He knows what we have, and he wants you gone before you can stand up in that courtroom and say it. Yes, she said. They stood there a moment longer in the cold. He underestimated you from the beginning, Elias said, not to flatter her. Just an observation. Most people do, she said. I stopped being bothered by it. Does it help, knowing he's scared? She thought about it honestly. A little, she said. Not as much as you'd think. They went back inside. The night before the hearing, Elias couldn't sleep. He got up around 2 in the morning and built the fire up and sat at the table in the dark. He wasn't thinking about the hearing exactly, or not only about it. He was thinking about the shape of the past 3 months, how different the cabin felt from the way it had felt when he'd ridden back from the station alone. On the day he expected Caroline Marsh and got no one. He'd been running on routine and obligation for 3 years. Feeding the stock, maintaining the fence, getting Lily through each season, moving from one necessary thing to the next without any sense that the movement was going anywhere, just that stopping was worse. He'd thought bringing a wife west was a practical solution to a practical problem. He'd thought about it in terms of labor and companionship and what Lily needed. He'd told himself it was all very rational. He understood now, sitting in the dark, that he'd also been unbearably lonely and hadn't let himself know it. The bedroom door opened and Elena came out in her coat. She slept with it. On the cold nights, he'd noticed, a habit from years of less reliable roofs, and stopped when she saw him at the table. You're up, she said. Can't sleep. She came to the table and sat across from him. She didn't ask if he was all right. She just sat there, and the fire made the light move across her face in the way firelight does. And for a long moment, neither of them said anything. Tell me something about Margaret, she said finally. He looked at her. It was not the question he expected. Why? Because you never do, she said. And I think you need to. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she might have thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, she was stubborn. Infuriatingly stubborn about things that didn't matter the way dishes were stacked, which direction to approach the lower pasture, whether it was going to rain when she said it was going to rain. He stopped. She was right about the rain. Almost every time. I don't know how she knew. Get here, the valley? She loved it, he said. She loved it more than I did. I came here because I needed land. She came here because she wanted to be somewhere the sky went on. He looked at his hands. She said the sky in Ohio was too small. Elena was quiet. She'd have liked you, he said, and then felt immediately uncertain about saying it. That's a strange thing to say. No, Elena said. It isn't. He looked at her. There was something between them in that firelit moment, not simple, not clean, not the kind of thing you put a name to easily. He was a man who had been left by death once and who understood now, sitting here, that he had been afraid since then of everything that might leave. Every neighbor who pulled back, every piece of ground he lost. He'd been contracting himself around the fear of more loss without realizing he was doing it. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I want you to know. It matters to me that you came back from Helena. I said I would, she said. People say things, he said. She looked at him steadily. I say things I mean, she said, not defensively. Just as a fact about herself offered plainly. He believed her. He wasn't sure when that had happened, when he'd gone from wariness to something that felt like trust, but it had. And sitting there in the dark, he decided not to examine the timing too carefully. We should sleep, he said. Yes, she said. She didn't move immediately. Then she said, we're going to be all right tomorrow. You don't know that. No, she said. But I know we've done everything we can, and that's what I mean by all right. She stood up. Sleep, Elias. She went back to the bedroom. He sat for another few minutes watching the fire. Then he went to the barn, lay down in the hay, and slept better than he had in weeks. They rode into Gallatin Crossing in the morning, with Lily between them on the wagon seat. He hadn't intended to bring her. But Lily had come down from the porch steps in her good coat, the one she wore for important occasions, the blue wool one with the buttons Margaret had chosen, and stood at the wagon with the look she had when she wasn't going to explain herself further and expected to be taken seriously. Elena had looked at Elias over the top of Lily's head and given a very small nod. So Lily came. The road into town was not long, but it felt long. They passed 3 properties along the way: the Alcott place, the Boone farm, the old Whitfield homestead that had been empty for 2 years. Elias knew the stories of each one, knew the notes Crow held on 2 of the 3. He'd grown up with the landscape of this valley, the way you grow up with a face you see every day, so familiar it becomes invisible. He was seeing it differently today, seeing the grid of debt underneath it, the invisible lines of obligation that ran from nearly every property to Crow's bank like strings. That was what the water rights were really about, not the water itself. Water rights in this valley were worth $4,000 to $6,000, which was real money. But control of the water meant something bigger. It meant every downstream property became dependent on whoever held the easement. It meant the leverage extended outward from the Whitmore ranch to every neighbor who used the eastern creek. Crow didn't want the water. He wanted the network. Elena had explained this to him 2 weeks ago, sitting at the table with a piece of paper where she'd drawn out the creek's path and marked the properties on either side. He'd looked at it and understood, and also understood why she understood it. She'd spent 2 years thinking in exactly these terms, in the language of land and water and what access meant over time. He was glad, sitting in the cold of the wagon, that she was the one who'd stepped off that train. "There are people outside the courthouse," Lily said. He looked up. There were 6 at least, standing in clusters outside the district building. Some of them he recognized, some he didn't. He'd expected Crow's presence and his lawyers. He hadn't entirely expected an audience. "Don't look at them," Elena said to Lily. "Look straight ahead." Lily looked straight ahead, pulled up to the courthouse, and Elias set the brake and climbed down and helped Lily down, and then extended his hand to Elena, which he hadn't done before, and which she accepted without remark. They walked toward the courthouse door. Nora Alcott was on the steps. She was not alone. Clara Boone's mother was beside her, and 2 women Elias recognized from the church social circuit. He braced for it, whatever it was going to be. Nora Alcott looked at Elena for a long moment, with an expression that was carefully unreadable. Then she said, "That blue coat needs pressing." Elena stopped. "Excuse me?" "The coat," Nora said. "It's good wool, but the lapels are creased. I can see it from here." She paused. Something shifted in her face, something that was doing a great deal of work to remain neutral. "You can use my iron when this is over. I'll be in town until 4. It was not an apology. It was not an endorsement. It was a woman who spread gossip, telling you she had seen what she had seen, and revised her conclusions without quite admitting she'd been wrong. Closest Nora Alcott had come to a gesture of solidarity in 20 years of living in that valley. Elena held her gaze for a moment. "Thank you," she said. They went inside. Victor Crow was already seated at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a man named Garrett from Billings, who was not Penfield. He'd brought someone in, which meant he was taking this more seriously than he wanted to show. Crow looked up when they came in. He looked at Elena with an expression that was composed and polished and told her exactly nothing, which told her everything. He was afraid. Not visibly. Not to anyone who didn't know how to look for it. But she knew how to look. Lily sat in the gallery behind their table and folded her hands in her lap and watched everything with the particular attention she brought to things that mattered. Clerk called the court to order. Judge Alderman came in from the side door, a tall man, gray-haired, with the posture of someone who had been making decisions for a long time and had made enough bad ones to be careful. He sat. He looked at the papers in front of him. He looked at both tables. "We're here on a fraud claim filed by Elias Whitmore against Black Pine Valley Bank and its principal, Victor Crow, pertaining to a loan contract dated February 1887, he said. "We're also here on a counterclaim of easement transfer filed by Crow under that same contract." He looked over his glasses. "This is going to be orderly. That's not a request." Elias was not a natural speaker. He knew it. He'd spent the week before preparing for this moment, and he still felt unprepared. Felt the words in his chest like something he needed to push past a resistance to get to. But he stood and said what needed to be said, that he had signed a contract under duress 3 weeks after his wife's death, that he had not understood the clause in question, and that the clause had not existed in the standard form submitted by the bank to the Territorial Commission. Then Alyssa stood. She did not perform certainty. She did not have the polish of Garrett, who had spent 20 years in courtrooms and knew how to move in them. What she had was precision. She laid out the timeline, the document comparison, the Helena records submission, the specific language differences between the standard form and what was in Elias's contract. She spoke the way she did everything directly, without ornament, in a voice that was steady without being cold. Crow's lawyer objected twice. Both times Judge Alderman let her continue. When she was done, the judge looked at the certified copies she'd submitted from Helena for a long time. He looked at the original loan document. He looked at Crow. "Mr. Crow," he said, "this clause appears in your client's contract, but not in the standard form your bank submitted for licensing purposes. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Garrett leaned in and said something in Crow's ear. Crow's face was composed. It had been composed since they walked in. Clause was added subsequent to the original template, in response to specific client circumstances, Garrett said. "Added when," the judge said. Garrett paused. "I'd need to—" "Added when," the judge said again, and there was no impatience in it, just the weight of the question sitting there. Crow spoke for the first time. When the original note was drawn up, he said, "Then why isn't it in the carbon copy filed with the loan origination records?" Elena said. She said it clearly, from the table, not loudly. Just clearly. "The filing copy in your own bank's origination records doesn't contain this clause. I have the certified extract." She laid it on the table. Courtroom was quiet enough that Elias could hear Lily shift in her seat behind him. Judge Alderman picked up the extract. "Read it." Set it down. He looked at Crow for a long time. Judge Alderman did not rule that day. He looked at Crow for a long time, and then he looked at the documents again, and then he said he was taking the matter under advisement and would issue a preliminary ruling within 5 business days. He said it without particular inflection, the way a man says something he has already decided, but intends to say correctly. Garrett began to object something about procedural timelines and the counterclaim, and the judge looked at him over the top of his glasses in a way that ended the objection before it fully formed. Court was dismissed. Crow left without looking at them. He moved through the room the way he always moved, unhurried, contained, as if the room existed to accommodate him and not the other way around. Patterson followed 2 steps behind. Garrett gathered papers at a speed that communicated displeasure without stating it. Elias stood at the table for a moment after they were gone. His hands were flat on the surface, and he was looking at the wall above the judge's empty chair, and Elena recognized the expression. It was the face of a man who had been holding himself together for weeks and was now in the strange suspended space of waiting, where the holding was still necessary, but the immediate emergency had passed, and the body didn't quite know what to do with that. She put a hand on his arm briefly. He looked at it, then at her. 5 days, she said. 5 days, he said. Lily came through the gallery rail without asking permission and stood beside her father and put her hand in his, closed his fingers around it. They walked out into the cold Gallatin Crossing afternoon, and Nora Alcott was still on the courthouse steps. She was talking to Clara Boone's mother and 2 other women, and she stopped when they came out and looked at Elena and said, in a voice that was audible to everyone on those steps, "You held your ground in there." "We all did," Elena said. Nora's mouth tightened in a way that might have been acknowledgement. She said nothing else, but she nodded once, and Elena took that for what it was worth, which was not nothing in this valley. They drove home in the early dark with Lily asleep against Elena's shoulder, and neither adult said much. There was a particular quality to that silence that was different from the silences of the past weeks, less tightly wound, not peaceful exactly, but no longer braced for the next impact. Just 2 people sitting with what had happened and what hadn't happened yet, in a wagon moving through frozen Montana night. "You did well today," Elias said. "Somewhere past the Alcott property." "We did well," Elena said. "You knew about the origination filing copy," he said. "I didn't. I thought of it on the road back from Helena," she said. "Banks file 2 copies of everything, one for the Territorial Commission and one for their own records. I requested both." He was quiet for a moment. "When did you learn to think like that?" "When I had to," she said. It was not self-pity, just the plain shape of a life. He didn't push further. She appreciated that about him, the way he stopped at the edge of things and didn't reach past where she'd indicated he could go. Most people didn't have that. They mistook curiosity for their right. They got home. He carried Lily in from the wagon. Elena built the fire up. Cabins settled around them. The 5 days that followed had the strange, drawn-out quality of time that won't move at its normal pace. Everything that needed to be done on the ranch still needed doing. The stock fed, the fences checked, the calf monitored, the accounts kept. Work didn't stop because they were waiting on a judge's ruling. Montana in January didn't accommodate that kind of pause. But underneath all the ordinary work ran a current of tension that nothing quite dispelled. On the second day, a man named Ruford, who owned the property east of the Henderson place and had no note with Crow's bank, which made him unusual in the valley, came by in the afternoon and stood at the fence and told Elias he'd heard about the hearing. "I heard what the woman said in there," Ruford said. He was 60, weathered in the way of men who'd worked outdoors their whole lives, a type Elias knew well. "About the clause, what about it?" Elias said. "I want to look at my own note," Ruford said. "From Territorial Savings. I signed it in '86. I want to know if there's anything in it I didn't read." Elias looked at him for a moment. "Elena can look at it," he said, "if you want to bring it." Ruford brought it the next morning. Elena sat at the table with it for an hour, while Ruford drank coffee and didn't say much and watched her read. She found nothing wrong with his note. It was a clean standard form document with no inserted language, properly witnessed, entirely ordinary. She told him so. He looked relieved. Then he said, "What about the Boones?" "Their note is from Crow's bank." Elena looked at him. "I can look at anyone's note who brings it to me," she said carefully. "But I can't go looking for trouble that isn't mine to find." "I understand that," Ruford said. He drank his coffee. "I'm just saying Clara Boone is 18, and her father's hands shake now from the cold. They don't know what's in that document any more than Elias did." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "If Clara Boone wants to bring the note here, I'll look at it." Ruford nodded. He left. He did not go home directly. Clara Boone came the following afternoon with a folded paper. She held the way you hold something you're afraid of. She was 18, and she'd grown up in Black Pine Valley, and she'd never left it, and the document looked enormous in her hands. She sat at the table across from Elena and pushed it across without speaking. Elena opened it. She read it carefully and deliberately, and her face did not move in ways Clara could easily interpret. And the waiting was hard enough that Clara finally said, "Is it bad?" Elena looked up. "There's a clause," she said, "similar to the one in Elias's note. Household composition, material misrepresentation. The language is almost identical." Clara stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means Victor Crow may have done this before," Elena said, "or planned to do it to more than one family." Clara's hands were flat on the table. Can he take our farm?" "Not automatically," Elena said. "Clause requires a triggering event and a formal finding. But it gives him the mechanism if he wants to use it." She looked at the girl across from her. "Do you want me to write down what I found?" "Exactly? In plain language?" "Yes," Clara said. "My father won't understand the legal wording." "I know," Elena said. She got a piece of paper. By the time she was done, the afternoon light was going. Clara folded the paper and held it and looked at Elena with something in her face that was more complicated than gratitude it was. The look of someone who has just understood the full dimensions of something they only half understood before, and who isn't sure whether knowing is better than not knowing. "Why is he doing this?" Clara said. "Why does he need the farm? He already has so much." Elena thought about how to answer that. She thought about what she knew of men like Crow, not this man specifically, but the type of man, the shape of the wanting. "Some people," she said carefully, "don't want things because the things themselves have value. They want them because having them means other people don't." Clara looked at her. "That's a terrible way to live." "Yes," Elena said. "It is." Clara left. Elias came in from the barn and looked at the 2 coffee cups on the table and the piece of paper Elena was folding into the ranch's document file. "Boone girl," he said. "Her father's note has the same clause," Elena said. He was still. "Crow put it in more than one. Possibly many more," she said. "I don't know how many yet." He sat down. "If he's done this across the valley, then our fraud case isn't just about Whitmore Ranch," she said. "It's about a pattern." He looked at her. The firelight was doing what it did in the evenings, softening the hard angles of the room, making the cold outside feel further away than it was. "You're thinking we should tell Alderman," he said. "I'm thinking Alderman needs to know," she said. "Whether we tell him or someone else does." She paused. "But we need more than 2 notes to show a pattern. We need to know who else Crow's bank holds paper on, and what's in those documents. People won't just hand over their private loan documents to a stranger." "Clara Boone did," Elena said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then you're not a stranger anymore," he said. She looked at him. "When did that change?" "I think it changed when Nora Alcott offered you the use of her iron," he said, and this time most smile made it all the way. "The judge's ruling came on the 4th day, not the 5th. Patterson brought it not to the ranch directly, but to Ira Stokes at the district clerk's office, and Stokes sent a rider out to Whitmore Ranch with a copy before noon. Elena was in the barn with the calf when she heard the rider coming, and she came out to meet him. She read the ruling twice in the cold of the yard with her breath-making fog. Elias came out of the house. "What does it say?" She looked up. "The easement transfer is suspended pending full hearing on the fraud claim," she said. "Alderman is scheduling a full evidentiary hearing for March 3rd. He's ordering Crow to produce all original loan documents for properties where the household composition clause appears." Elias stared at her, all of them. "He used the word systemic," she said. She looked back down at the paper. "He wrote that the evidence presented suggests a potentially systemic insertion of non-standard language into loan contracts without borrower knowledge, and that the court has an obligation to determine the full scope." "He believes us," Elias said. "He believes the documents," she said, which was more durable. She handed him the ruling. He read it slower than she had, the way he read things he needed to be sure of. Then he looked up at the sky, clear and cold and enormous the way Montana's sky was in winter, and he let out a breath that was not quite a sound, just an exhaling of something he'd been holding. "March 3rd, he said. 6 weeks, she said. "That's a long time for Crow to work with." "Yes," she said. "He's going to come at us differently now." She was right. The first thing Crow did was send Garrett to file a motion challenging the judge's authority to compel production of private banking documents across multiple accounts. It was a reasonable, legal argument, and it would take time to resolve even if it ultimately failed. Time was the point. Every week the matter stayed in procedural dispute was a week Crow had to manage the situation by other means. The second thing he did was more direct. 3 days after Alderman's preliminary ruling, Elias went into Gallatin Crossing for supplies and found that the general merchant, a man named Pritchard, who'd supplied the Whitmore Ranch for 11 years, had put a handwritten note on the account, no further credit. Elias stood at the counter with his list and looked at the note and then at Pritchard, who would not quite meet his eyes. "I've never missed a payment," Elias said. "No, sir, you haven't." Pritchard's voice was careful. "This is a business decision." "Whose business decision?" "Mine," Pritchard said. And that was technically true, in the way that a lot of things Crow arranged were technically true if you didn't ask what was underneath them. Elias took his list back. He bought what he could with cash on hand, which was not all of it, and drove home in a mood that Lily recognized the moment he came through the door, and that Elena recognized 3 seconds after that. She waited until Lily was in bed. "What happened?" she said. He told her. His voice was even, but his jaw was not. She watched the muscle in it work. "He's cutting off the accounts," she said. "Not just Pritchard. Others, probably," he said. "If he leans on anyone who's got a note with his bank." "How many merchants in the valley hold notes with Black Pine Valley Bank?" He thought about it. 4 that I know of. Maybe more." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need to go to the Boones tomorrow." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because Clara knows everyone in this valley, and I don't," she said. "And because if Crow is going to try to starve us out before March 3rd, we need to know who's with us and who can't afford to be. We need to map it." "Map what exactly?" "The network," she said. "The same way he maps it. He knows who owes him and how much and what that means. We need to know the same thing, but from the other direction, who owes him, who doesn't, and who's angry enough about the first thing to help with the second." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Since Helena," she said. "Since I drew the creek map and saw what he was actually building." He sat back. "Clara Boone is 18 years old. She's also the person who knows every family in this valley by name and knows who's struggling and who's afraid," Elena said. "That's not nothing. That's almost everything." He didn't argue further. She'd noticed he had a particular quality once he'd been persuaded by actual logic. He stopped resisting. He didn't need to be right more than he needed things to work. She found that rarer than it should have been in a person. "Careful with the Boones," he said. "Owen Henderson put his own fear in the middle of a man's face, and I understand it. Don't push people to commitments they can't keep." "I won't," she said. "I mean it, Elena." "I know you mean it," she said. "So do I." Clara Boone met her at the gate of the Boone property the next morning, which meant she'd been watching for her. She was bundled in a coat that was good wool, but had been mended at both elbows, and her face had the particular alertness of someone who'd been waiting to continue a conversation that had been interrupted. They walked. That was how it went, not sitting at a table where things felt formal, but walking the edge of the Boone pasture in the cold while Clara talked and Elena listened. Clara knew 6 families with notes at Crow's Bank. She knew which ones had been approached about selling land in the past 2 years. She knew which ones had received extensions, which ones had owed that gentleness, and had been quietly afraid about what it meant. She talked for 40 minutes without much prompting because she'd clearly been holding all of it, and nobody had ever asked her to say it out loud before. Elena listened and did not write anything down. She stored it. The Halverson place, Clara said finally, north of the valley. Mr. Halverson died in the fall, and his wife is trying to hold the property. She has a note. I don't know what's in it. Is she someone who would talk to me? Clara considered. She's not easy. She doesn't accept help from people she doesn't know. Understandable, Elena said. But she was Margaret Whitmore's closest friend, Clara said, for years, before Mrs. Whitmore passed. Elena was quiet for a moment. What's her name? Vera, Clara said. Vera Halverson. Elena looked out across the Boone pasture, the snow and the fence line and the mountains behind it going pale gray in the thin winter light. All right, she said. She went to the Halverson place that afternoon. Vera Halverson came to the door and looked at her with the expression of a woman who had recently learned to conserve everything, including welcome. You're the woman from Whitmore Ranch, Vera said. Yes, Elena said. The one from the train. Yes. Vera looked at her for a long moment. She was 60 or close to it, with gray hair pulled back plainly, and hands that showed years of outdoor work. She had the kind of face that had probably been pretty and then become something more durable. Margaret wrote to me about Elias, she said, in her last letters. She said he was going to break apart after she was gone. She was worried about Lily more than anything. Elena stood in the cold of the doorway and didn't say anything. She'd have wanted someone there, Vera said, even if it wasn't the someone anyone planned. She stepped back from the door. Come in out of the cold. Elena came in. She spent 2 hours at the Halverson place. Vera's note with Crow's Bank was 4 years old, and she had not looked at it carefully since she signed it, because her husband had handled those matters. She found it in the strong box, and Elena read it at the kitchen table, while Vera made coffee that was weaker than Elena would have made, but she drank without comment. The household composition clause was there. Same language, same insertion point in the document, same slightly heavier ink on that particular section. He put it in yours too, Elena said. Vera stood very still. What does that mean? It means he may try to use it, Elena said. It means you should know it's there. My husband is dead, Vera said. I'm alone here. What composition is there to question? I don't know yet, Elena said honestly. But I want you to know about it before he decides to. Vera sat down. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how many others? I don't know, Elena said. I'm trying to find out. Are you trying to fight him? We already are, Elena said. The hearing is March 3rd. Judge Alderman ordered Crow to produce his loan documents for all properties where this clause appears. If we can show it's in multiple contracts, it changes the case from a dispute about one ranch to a question about how the bank operates. Vera looked at her across the table. And if you lose? Then we lose, Elena said. But we'll have tried. Vera was quiet again for a longer time. Outside, the wind had come up and was making the window glass flex slightly in its frame. Margaret said he was stubborn, she said Elias. She said it with affection, but it was still true. It is still true, Elena said. The corner of Vera's mouth moved. She'd like you, she said. I can see why she would. She looked at the copy Elena had made of the relevant clause. What do you need from me? Your testimony, if it comes to that, Elena said. Your permission to present your document as part of the evidence of pattern. You have it, Vera said. She said it without hesitation, which surprised Elena. You're not afraid of him? Elena said. I'm afraid of him every day, Vera said. I've been afraid of him since my husband died, and I realized what was in our account terms. But I'm 61 years old, and I'm tired of arranging my life around what Victor Crow might do. She picked up her coffee. Margaret Whitmore's family is fighting him. That's enough for me. Elias received a letter from Garrett's office on a Monday morning, delivered to the ranch directly, rather than through the court, a personal letter, not a legal filing. He read it at the table with his coffee, and his face went through several changes that Elena watched without interpreting aloud. He handed it to her when he was done. The letter informed him that Mr. Crow, through his legal representatives, had identified additional grounds for the fraud claim under Territorial Statute 44C, relating to the housing of an unregistered person on a property held under active banknote. It said that Elena Voss, having arrived in the valley without formal documentation of her arrangement with the Whitmore household, might be considered an occupant in violation of the note's occupancy terms. It said that if Miss Voss were to voluntarily depart before February 15th, 2 weeks before March 3rd, Mr. Crow would drop all pending claims and revert the water easement situation to its pre-December status, with all previous loan extension terms reinstated. He's offering to give back what he stole if I leave, Elena said. That's one way to read it, Elias said. Is there another way? He's scared, Elias said. He was scared before. He's more scared now. He looked at her. Vera Halverson talked to Owen Henderson yesterday. Henderson came to me this morning, before you were up. Elena was still. What did he say? He wants to bring his note in, Elias said. He wants you to look at it. She put the letter down on the table. Owen Henderson, who had stood at the door 3 weeks ago, with his hat in his hands and his 5 children in his mind, and told Elias he could not testify. Owen Henderson, who had apologized with the particular shame of a man who knew he was making the wrong choice and made it anyway because the other choice was worse. He changed his mind, she said. Vera told him about the clause in her note, Elias said. He went home and pulled his own documents out that night. He paused. He was up until 2 in the morning, he said, looking at it. And he found it, Elias said, same section, same language. He said he felt sick. Elena looked at the Garrett letter. She thought about the shape of what was forming Henderson. Vera Halverson, the Boones, possibly others. A collection of people who'd each been sitting alone with a document they didn't fully understand, each afraid in their own private way. And what happened when you put the private fears alongside each other and let people see they weren't alone in it? How many notes with this clause do we need to demonstrate a pattern? She said. I asked Stokes that, Elias said. He said a judge would want at minimum 3 independent examples with no direct connection between the borrowers. We have 3, Elena said. We might have more if I keep looking. You've been looking for 2 weeks, he said, in the cold, riding across the valley. I know, Elena. He said her name with a weight that made her look up from the letter. He was watching her with an expression she'd learned to read over the past weeks, not the almost smile, something more open than that, something it cost him more to show. You didn't have to do any of this. This is our fight, mine and Lily's. Is it? She said. You didn't come here for this. No, she said. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. She looked at him steadily. But I'm still here. I rode to Helena and back in January. I've been to 4 properties this week. I'm sitting at this table, looking at a letter from a man who wants me gone badly enough to give back what he stole. She paused. At what point does it become my fight too? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her in that particular way. He had not searching for something, not weighing, just looking, like a man who was trying to hold still long enough to see something clearly. It became your fight when you turned his messenger away at the fence, he said. Then stop asking when it starts, she said. He was quiet. Then bring Henderson's note in, he said, and whatever else you find. I will, and be careful, Elena. He said it, the same way he'd said come back from Helena not commanding, something more uncertain and more real. Not because I'm asking you to be careful for my sake. Because Crozo is going to find a different way to come at us before March 3rd, and I don't know what it is yet. Neither do I, she said. But he's used the courts, and he's used the merchants, and he's used the letter. She looked down at the paper on the table. He's running out of instruments. Men like Crow always have one more instrument, Elias said. He was right. They found out how right he was 4 days later. It came through Lily. She was in school, the Valley Schoolhouse, that served 12 children from 6 families, held 3 days a week by a teacher named Mr. Gaines, who was 24 and earnest and trying. On a Thursday afternoon, 2 days after Henderson brought his note to the ranch, Lily came home from school and went directly to the barn and did not come out for 20 minutes. Elena found her there with the calf, sitting in the hay beside it, with her arms around her knees, and her face doing something careful and controlled that was too controlled for a 7-year-old. Elena sat down in the hay nearby and waited. Someone said something today, Elena said finally. Not a question. Lily was quiet for a moment. Aldous Ferry's son, she said. Aldous Ferry, the land office clerk. He said you were a liar and my papa was going to lose the ranch because of you. Elena was still. He said you tricked your way here, Lily said. He said everybody in town knows it. What did you say? Lily looked at her hands. Nothing, she said. I didn't know what to say. She looked up. He's wrong, isn't he? Yes, Elena said, but you did come on a different ticket, Lily said. It was not an accusation. It was a child trying to hold 2 true things at once and figure out how they fit together. You weren't the woman Papa sent for. That's true, Elena said. And I told your father that immediately. I didn't hide it from him. But you stayed, Lily said. I stayed. Why? Elena looked at the calf, who was watching them both with the mild interest of a young animal that has decided humans are not worth fearing. She thought about how to answer this in a way that was honest, without being more than a 7-year-old needed to carry. Because your father needed to know what happened in person, she said. Because I had nowhere else to go that mattered more than telling him the truth. And then I stayed because staying seemed right. She paused. Not because I planned it. Because it was in front of me and it was real. Lily thought about this for a while. Ferry's son is mean, she said finally. His father is afraid, Elena said. Afraid people make mean children sometimes. Lily leaned her head back against the stall wall. Are you afraid? Yes, Elena said. Some of Crow? Of the hearing, Elena said. Of the things we don't know yet. But not of staying, Lily said. Elena looked at her. The girl was 7, and she asked questions that found the exact thing you were actually thinking about. No, Elena said, not of staying. Lily nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already decided. Then we'll be all right, she said. Elena did not tell her it was more complicated than that. She knew it was. But she also knew that sometimes a child's certainty was not naivety. Sometimes it was the clean version of the same conclusion you'd reached by a longer road, and it was worth not arguing with it. They sat in the hay with the calf until the light started going. Crow's final instrument arrived on a Saturday morning. It was not a letter this time. It was a man not Patterson, someone Elena hadn't seen before. He rode up to the Whitmore ranch in the mid-morning and stopped at the property line and sat on his horse and waited, which was the particular patience of someone who had been told to wait and intended to do it indefinitely. Elias went out, Elena followed, Lily stayed on the porch. The man was perhaps 50 heavyset with a badge on his coat, a deputy sheriff's badge, not from Gallatin County, from the next county north, which meant Crow had gone outside the local sheriff's office, probably because the local sheriff had told him no. The deputy had a paper, he held it out, Elias took it. Formal notice. Elena read it over his shoulder. The notice stated that Elena Voss had been identified as a person traveling under a fraudulent rail ticket specifically, the ticket issued to Caroline Marsh by the Montana Brides Placement Agency, which had been reported to the agency as misappropriated. The agency had filed a formal complaint. The complaint had been forwarded to the Territorial Marshal's office. Elena Voss was hereby notified to appear for interview at the county sheriff's office in Gallatin Crossing within 72 hours, or a warrant for her detention would be issued. She read it twice. The ticket. She had never thought about the ticket as a legal vulnerability. It had been on the seat beside her when she boarded in Fargo, left by Caroline Marsh with the station master, and the station master had told her she could use it, that it would go unused otherwise. She had a letter from that station master somewhere in her trunk. She had not thought to produce it before now, because no one had questioned the ticket before now. You have until Monday, the deputy said. He didn't say it unkindly. Doing his job. She'll be there, Elias said. The deputy nodded and rode away. Elias stood at the property line and watched him go and then turned to Elena. Ticket, he said. I have a letter from the Fargo station master, she said. He authorized me to use it. He was the ticketing agent. He had the authority. Where's the letter? In my trunk, she said. I've had it since November. He looked at her steadily. You've had it all along. I didn't know I needed it, she said. I didn't think the ticket would become a legal matter. He was quiet for a moment that was longer than she wanted it to be. She watched something move through his expression, not doubt about her exactly. More the particular strain of a man who was holding more weight than he'd expected for longer than he'd expected, and felt the addition of one more thing. Elias, she said. I know, he said. It's not what he's making it. I know that too, he said. He turned and walked back toward the house, stopped, turned back. His voice was tired in a way she hadn't heard before. I know. I believe you. He stopped. What? He looked at her. I want it to be over, he said. I want 1 week where something isn't coming at us. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she'd been allowing herself to look more freely in the past weeks, the tiredness in his face and the strength underneath it, and the loneliness that was different now than it had been in December, but was still there in a different shape. So do I, she said. But we're not there yet. I know. The letter from the station master, combined with the testimony that Caroline Marsh left the ticket voluntarily, clears the fraud charge, she said. We have the letter. We need to find someone who witnessed Marsh leaving the ticket at Fargo. That's 300 miles away. It's 300 miles and a telegram, she said. Let me try the telegram first. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded. He went inside. She followed. She sat at the table and wrote the telegram that afternoon, and Elias wrote it to the Gallatin Crossing telegraph office before evening. It was addressed to the Fargo Northern Station. Attention of the ticketing office, requesting confirmation of the circumstances under which ticket number 4000, 471C had been transferred on November 14th, 1889. She did not know if the response would come in time. She did not know if Crow had more instruments she hadn't seen yet. What she knew was this: the station master's letter was in her trunk. The Henderson note was in the file. Vera Halverson had given her testimony. And in 38 days, March 3rd would come, and they would walk into that courtroom again. And whatever Crow had arranged would have to face what they had arranged, and one of those two things would hold. She put the carbon copy of the telegram in the file with everything else, looked at the growing stack of documents, and felt the weight of it not as burden exactly, as reality, as the accumulated proof of a life that had not been easy and had not pretended to be. Closed the file. Outside, Lily was calling something to the barn cats in that particular voice she used, when she thought no one else was listening, not words exactly. Just sounds comforting and small and entirely herself. Elena sat and listened to it for a moment before she got up to start the evening fire. The telegram response came on a Tuesday, 6 days after they sent it, and 48 hours before Elena was due at the sheriff's office. Elias brought it back from town in the early afternoon and set it on the table without a word. Elena picked it up. It was from the Fargo Northern Station ticketing office, signed by a man named Gerald Cook, assistant station master. It confirmed that on November 14th, 1889, a ticket issued to Caroline Marsh under agency contract had been voluntarily surrendered at the Fargo counter by the ticketing holder. Confirmed that the assistant station master on duty had authorized the transfer of the unused ticket to another passenger traveling the same route. Confirmed the ticket number. It confirmed Elena Voss by name as the authorized recipient. She set it down. That's it. That's most of it, she said. Combined with my station master's letter, it should be enough to close the complaint. Should be, he said. It will be, she said, with more certainty than she felt, because he needed it more than she needed to be accurate about her uncertainty. They rode into Gallatin Crossing the next morning, both of them, leaving Lily with Vera Halverson, who had come to the ranch the day before with a pot of soup she said was from her own excess of fiction so transparent and kind that neither Elias nor Elena challenged it. Vera had taken Lily by the hand and told her to show her the calf, and Lily had done it with the earnest pride of someone presenting something important. The sheriff's office was small and smelled of wood smoke and old paper. The deputy who'd delivered the notice was there, and also the county sheriff himself, a man named Briggs, who had the look of someone who had been doing his job long enough to have stopped enjoying parts of it. Took the telegram and Elena's original station master's letter and read both carefully. The complaint was filed by the Montana Brides Placement Agency, he said, on behalf of a Miss Caroline Marsh. Miss Marsh left the ticket voluntarily, Elena said. The Fargo Telegraph confirms it. It confirms the ticket was transferred, Briggs said. That's not the same as the agency's authorization. The agency's contract was with Miss Marsh, Elena said. When Miss Marsh surrendered the ticket, the agency's claim on it went with her. The assistant station master then had authority to reassign it as unclaimed transport. She paused. I can cite the relevant territorial transport code if that's helpful. Briggs looked at her over the top of the papers. It was the look of a man recalibrating. Elias said nothing. He'd learned over the past weeks when to let Elena speak. Briggs put the papers down. Who filed this complaint with my office, he said. And it was not entirely directed at Elena. It was a man asking himself a question out loud, reviewing a sequence. The complaint was forwarded from the territorial marshal's office, his deputy said, through the agency's filing. And the agency's filing, Briggs said slowly, came from where exactly? No one answered. He picked up a different paper on his desk, the forwarding notice from the marshal's office, and looked at it. Then he set it down. Miss Voss, he said, the complaint against you is dismissed. The documentation is sufficient. He said it plainly. Not apologetically, he was a man who made decisions and stated them. I'll send the dismissal to the marshal's office today. Thank you, Elena said. I'd also suggest, Briggs said, looking at neither of them in particular, that whoever filed this complaint with the agency did so knowing full well that a telegraph response from Fargo would resolve it in your favor. Which means the point was the 72-hour notice, not the complaint itself. He looked up then, and for a moment his eyes met Elias's, with the directness of a man communicating something he couldn't officially say. I understand, Elias said. They left the sheriff's office and stood on the Gallatin Crossing Street in the February cold, and Elias put his hat back on and looked down the main street at nothing in particular. He wanted 2 days of me worried about arrest warrants, Elena said. He wanted you distracted, Elias said. 48 hours where you weren't looking at loan documents. What did he do with those 48 hours? Elias looked at her. I don't know yet. They found out the next day. What Crow had done was quiet and specific and very nearly effective. He had contacted the district court clerk in Billings, not Stokes, who was in Gallatin Crossing, but the clerk who managed Judge Alderman's calendar and docket in the district office. Through Garrett, he had filed a motion to consolidate the Whitmore fraud case with 2 other pending matters involving the bank on the grounds of judicial efficiency. Consolidation motion was technically procedural and legitimate. Its effect, if granted, was to move the hearing from March 3rd to sometime in April at the earliest, pending the consolidated scheduling. Stokes found it when he was reviewing the week's filings on Wednesday morning and sent a rider to the ranch immediately. Elena read the consolidation motion at the table, with Stokes's explanatory note beside it. Elias stood at the window. If the hearing moves to April, she said. He has 6 more weeks, Elias said. 6 more weeks to work on Henderson, on Vera, on anyone else who might testify. And 6 more weeks to keep us running, she said. The merchant credit is already cut off. If the hearing delays long enough, we can't sustain the ranch past May without credit, he said. Cash reserves are nearly gone. She was quiet. The fire worked. Lily was in the yard feeding the horses, which she'd taken over doing each morning without being asked, as if she understood the adults needed the time. We need to oppose the consolidation motion, Elena said, immediately, before Alderman rules on it. On what grounds? Prejudice to the moving party, she said. That's us. We can argue that a delay constitutes undue prejudice, given the economic pressures currently being applied to the Whitmore property, the merchant credit withdrawals, the suppression of the water easement. We document every piece of pressure and present it as evidence that delay is not procedurally neutral, that it's itself an instrument of harm. Elias turned from the window. Can we write that argument ourselves? I can write it, she said, but it needs to be filed today. The motion has been sitting in the district office for 2 days already. He looked at her. Write it, he said. She wrote it in 2 hours. It was 4 pages, tight and specific, citing 3 territorial precedents for opposition to consolidation on prejudice grounds, each of which she had found in the reference volumes at the Helena district office and copied by hand during her visit. She had not known then what she would need them for. She had copied them because they seemed relevant to the shape of what Crow was building, and she'd been right about the shape. Elias rode the filing to Gallatin Crossing, and Stokes forwarded it to Billings that afternoon. They waited. Judge Alderman denied the consolidation motion on a Friday morning, 4 days after it was filed. His denial was 2 paragraphs. The first noted that the cases proposed for consolidation had no material factual overlap with the Whitmore matter. The second noted that the court had reviewed the evidence of economic pressure presented by the opposing party and found it sufficiently credible to conclude that procedural delay would not be neutral in effect. The hearing would proceed on March 3rd as scheduled. Stokes sent the notice to the ranch with a rider, and the rider was a young man Elena hadn't met before 19 or 20, with the looks of someone who'd ridden fast to get there. And when he handed her the notice, he said, "Mr. Stokes said to tell you the filing you wrote was clean work." She thanked him. He rode back. She stood in the yard with the notice and the cold on her face and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't fully realized was tight. Not victory March 3rd hadn't come yet, but the ground was holding. Each thing Crow had tried, they'd answered, and the ground was still holding. Elias came out of the barn. She handed him the notice without speaking. He read it. "Clean work," he said. That's what Stokes said. He's right. He folded the notice and put it in his coat. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she said. They looked at each other in the yard, in the February cold, and something passed between them that wasn't words. It was the look of 2 people who had been in a long, difficult thing together and were still in it, but could see a specific point ahead where the shape of it would change, one way or another. After March 3rd, he said, and then stopped. After March 3rd, she said, and left it there with him. He nodded once. He went back to the barn. She went back inside to the documents and the accounts and the work that didn't stop, because they were waiting on a judge. 2 weeks before the hearing had a different quality than the weeks before. Part of it was that the opposition had gone quiet. No more letters from Garrett. No riders at the property line. No new legal motions. Patterson was not seen in the valley at all the week before March 3rd, which meant either Crow had run out of instruments, as Elena had suggested, or he was saving what he had left for the courtroom. She suspected the latter. The silence was not comfortable. She knew better than to read it as retreat. What she did with the silence was prepare. She organized the evidence file into a clear sequence, the original loan document with the inserted clause, the Helena records showing the standard template without it, the origination file copy also without it, Henderson's note with its matching clause, Vera Halverson's note with its matching clause, the Boone note with its clause. 5 documents, 3 independent borrowers, all showing the same inserted language, in the same position with the same slightly heavier ink, in a section where no standard template had ever put it. She also had the station master's telegram and letter, which cleared the ticket complaint entirely and would be entered to foreclose any attempt Garrett made to revisit that ground. And she had one more thing, which she hadn't told Elias about yet. On the Monday before the hearing, she told him. She sat at the table after dinner with the document file in front of her and said, "There's something else I want to present at the hearing." He looked up from the ledger he was reviewing. He'd started reviewing it himself in the evenings, which was new. He was learning to read it the way she read it, and she found that she liked this more than she expected to. "What is it?" "The creek survey," she said. "The water easement survey from 1882. The original one." He put the ledger down. "That survey established our rights." "Yes," she said, "but it also established something else. The easement Crow has been trying to claim is described in our loan document as the Eastern Creek easement, singular. But the 1882 survey shows 2 water sources, the Eastern Creek, and a tributary that branches north of the Halverson property before it joins the main creek. It was very still, that tributary. Is not included in the loan document's description," she said. "At all. The loan document describes only the Eastern Creek easement. The clause Crow inserted triggers a transfer of what the document describes, which is the Eastern Creek easement, not the tributary." "He doesn't get the tributary," Elias said slowly. "He never described it," she said. "It's not in the clause. Even if the clause were valid, which we're arguing it wouldn't capture the tributary rights. The tributary serves the North Pasture," he said, "and the Halverson property east of it," she said. "Vera's water comes from the tributary junction. If Crow had gotten the Eastern Creek easement through the fraudulent clause, he would have eventually argued the tributary was part of it. He would have been wrong, but he would have argued it, and the cost of that fight would have been ruinous," Elias said. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "You found this in the 1882 survey." "I found it when I was looking at the creek map I drew in December," she said. "I didn't understand what I was seeing until I pulled the original survey document from the ranch records and compared it to the loan description." He was quiet. Outside, the wind had come up again, February wind, the kind that had been with them for weeks, moving around the cabin in the particular persistent way of Montana winter, that never quite let you forget it was there. "Elias," she said. "I'm thinking," he said. He looked at the survey she had placed on the table. "If we put this in front of aldermen, it changes the scope," she said. "Not just the fraud claim. It shows Crow was trying to obtain rights he couldn't have described accurately in the document. Suggests he knew the clause was fraudulent from the beginning and constructed it to be broad enough to sweep in things the document didn't specifically name. Intent," she said. He sat back, put both hands flat on the table the way he did when he was running something through his mind from every angle. "That's the whole case," he said. "That's not just a defense. That's a case against him." "Yes," she said, "it is." He looked at her. The firelight was doing what it did. Lily was asleep in her bunk. The cabin was warm and quiet and holding them both in the particular way of a place that had become, through work and difficulty and time, somewhere real. "When did you figure this out?" he said. 3 weeks ago," she said. "I've been verifying it since." "You didn't tell me." "I didn't want to tell you until I was certain," she said. "I've been wrong about things before. I didn't want to give you something that turned out not to hold." He looked at her for a moment. "You've been carrying it alone for 3 weeks." "I'm used to carrying things alone," she said. It came out more plainly than she intended, not self-pity, just fact, the way she said most things about herself. Something moved in his face. Not the almost smile this time. Something quieter and more serious. "You don't have to be," he said. She looked at him. "Used to it, I mean," he said. He was not a man who said things like this. Easily she could see the effort it took and respected that he was making it anyway. Not here, not anymore. She held his gaze for a moment. There were things she could have said. She chose the most honest one. "I'm working on it," she said. He nodded. He looked down at the survey. "All right," he said. "We put it all in front of Alderman." "All of it," she said. "And then we see." "And then we see," she said. March 3rd came on a Wednesday, which meant the valley roads were whatever February had left them, which was not good. Elias had the wagon hitched before light. Vera Halverson was bringing her own buggy. Owen Henderson had said he would be there, and Elena had not let herself decide whether to believe it until she saw him. Lily wore the blue coat again. She'd pressed it herself this time, having borrowed Nora Alcott's iron the week before, and practiced on a piece of scrap cloth until she got the temperature right. Elena had watched her do it, and said nothing except that the lapels looked right when she was done. They drove into Gallatin Crossing in a pale winter morning, the sky the color of old pewter, and the courthouse steps had more people on them than the first hearing had brought. Elena counted quickly not all neighbors. Some she didn't know. People from further in the county who'd heard about the case through the channels that moved information across territory. A fraud claim against a bank principal drew a different kind of attention than a property dispute. Owen Henderson was there. He was standing at the edge of the crowd with his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who has made a decision that cost him something and is standing by it anyway. Caught Elena's eye and nodded. She nodded back. Vera Halverson's buggy pulled up behind them. Vera stepped down with the deliberate care of a woman who does not hurry for anyone and never has. She was wearing her good coat and her hat, and she looked at the courthouse like a woman who had been waiting a long time to look at it in exactly this context. Clara Boone was there with her mother. Clara was holding a folder of papers, her family's loan document, the one Elena had annotated in plain language 3 weeks ago. She was 18 and her hands were steady. Nora Alcott was on the steps. She was not testifying, and she had not been asked to. She was simply there, which in Nora Alcott terms was its own kind of statement. They went inside. Crow was already seated. Garrett was beside him with a case of files. Crow looked the same as he had in February, composed, contained the particular stillness of a man who has arranged things in advance and is waiting for the arrangement to resolve. But Elena looked at his hands on the table and saw that the right one was not entirely still, and she recognized what that meant. He knew about the survey, or he suspected she had something. Either way, the stillness was being maintained at some cost. Judge Alderman came in. The hearing was longer than the first one. Garrett opened for Crow, and he was good, she had to admit that. He was organized and precise, and he built the argument in clean stages. The contract was valid, the clause was present and acknowledged, the change in household composition was documented. He made it sound like a simple matter of contractual obligation. Then Elena stood. She was not a lawyer. She had said so at the beginning of the hearing. When Alderman asked if she was representing the Whitmores as counsel, she said she was presenting evidence as a knowledgeable party. He had allowed it with a look that told her he was watching her carefully and would stop her if she stepped past what that meant. She presented the documents in order. The Helena records, the origination filing copy, Henderson's note, Vera's note, the Boone note, each one quietly with specific reference to the matching language, and the ink variation she had documented in her written statement, which she had submitted to the court 3 days before. Garrett objected to the ink analysis on the grounds that Elena was not a document examiner. Alderman looked at the statement she had submitted, which included her 2 years of experience handling original land survey and loan documents, and the specific methodology she had used it to identify the variation, and said the objection was noted. The evidence was admitted, weight to be determined. Then she put the 1,882 creek survey on the table. She explained it. She explained the tributary. She explained the discrepancy between what the loan document described and what the survey showed. She explained that even if the court found the clause valid, the easement it purported to transfer did not include the tributary, and the tributary served both the Whitmore North pasture and the Halverson property, and any subsequent attempt by Crow's company to claim the tributary under the transferred easement would itself constitute a fraudulent expansion of whatever rights the clause could legitimately convey. Courtroom was quiet while she said this. Not the polite quiet of procedure, the real quiet of people absorbing something. Garrett stood. He was going to object. He opened his mouth. Crow put a hand on his arm. Garrett closed his mouth. It was the most telling moment of the hearing, a man stopping his own lawyer in the middle of an objection. which meant the man had just heard something he needed to think about before he allowed further argument. Alderman watched it happen. Elena watched it happen. Courtroom watched it happen. Crow looked at the survey. For a moment, a brief and specific moment, his composure shifted. Not broke. Just shifted the way a mask shifts when the face beneath it changes expression and the mask doesn't quite follow. He looked at the survey, and he looked at Elena, and she saw what was in his face under the composed exterior. He had not known about the tributary discrepancy. He had written a clause to capture the water easement in broad enough terms to claim everything adjacent, but he had not done a careful enough survey comparison to know that the tributary was legally separate and excluded from the loan document's description. He had written himself into a box and not known it until she just showed the box to a judge in open court. She sat down. Elias was looking at the table in front of him, with the careful expression of a man who was not going to show what he felt until he was somewhere private. She understood that. She felt it, too, the specific and complicated feeling of something turning, not resolved yet, not over, but turn. Alderman looked at Garrett. Does opposing counsel wish to respond to the survey presentation? Garrett leaned toward Crow. They murmured. It went on longer than it should have. Alderman waited with the patience of a man who had seen this before. Finally, Garrett straightened. Your Honor, the plaintiff requests a brief recess to review the survey documentation. Alderman looked at his watch. He looked at the courtroom. We'll recess for 30 minutes, he said. In the hallway, Elias stood with his back against the wall and looked at the ceiling. You didn't tell me about the tributary in your prepared remarks, he said. I didn't want Garrett to have it in advance, she said. If they'd known, they'd have had an argument ready. He didn't have an argument ready. No, she said. He brought his eyes down from the ceiling and looked at her. He was not a man who expressed much in public places, in courtrooms, in front of other people. But there was something in his face right now that was not restrained, not performed, not careful. Something open, Elena, he said. It's not over, she said. I know that. The ruling could still— I know, he said. I'm not talking about the ruling. She looked at him. The hallway had other people in it, Henderson, talking quietly with Vera, Clara Boone near the window. No one was watching them. Then what are you talking about, she said. He was quiet for a moment that was not uncomfortable, just waited. After this, he said. Whatever way it goes. I want to talk about after this. She looked at him steadily. All right, she said. That's all I'm saying right now, he said. I know, she said. It's enough. They stood there in the hallway until the clerk called them back in. Alderman took his seat. He looked at both tables. The court has reviewed the submitted evidence, he said, and finds the following. The household composition clause, as it appears in the Whitmore loan document, dated February 1887, does not appear in the standard form contract submitted by Black Pine Valley Bank to the Territorial Banking Commission for licensing purposes. Nor does it appear in the bank's own origination file copy of the same document. Court further finds that substantially identical non-standard language appears in no fewer than 3 additional loan documents issued by the same bank to separate and unrelated borrowers, constituting a pattern sufficient to establish that the insertions were deliberate and systematic rather than clerical. Courtroom was very still. The easement transfer claim filed by Black Pine Valley Bank and its principal is denied, Alderman said. Court further finds probable cause for a Territorial Banking Commission inquiry into the loan practices of Black Pine Valley Bank and will forward this record to the Commission for review. He looked at Crow over his glasses. Mr. Crow, the court expects your full cooperation with that inquiry. The hearing is concluded. He stood. Everyone stood. The sound that came up in the courtroom was not dramatic, not a cheer, not something big. It was the specific sound of people exhaling, of held breath released. The small and human sound of relief. Elias stood at the table with both hands flat on the surface, the same posture he'd had on the worst mornings, and he stayed like that for a moment. Then he straightened. He looked at Elena. She looked back at him. Lily pushed through the gallery rail and came to them both, and put one hand in Elias's and reached for Elena's with the other. And the 3 of them stood there in the middle of the courtroom while the room moved around them. And it was Lily who said the only thing that needed saying. Can we go home now? She said. Yes, Elias said. His voice was not entirely steady. Yeah, we can go home. They walked out into the March air, which was cold still but different, the particular cold of early spring working its way under the surface of the last of winter, the kind that didn't bite so much as remind you that something was changing. Vera Halverson was on the steps, and she gripped Elena's hand once, firmly, without speaking. Owen Henderson said he was sorry again, and this time there was less shame in it, and more just the bare truth of it. Clara Boone was smiling in the tentative way of someone who hasn't let herself fully believe something yet. Nora Alcott said, "From the third step, the coat looks better." Elena looked at the lapels of her own coat. They were still creased. She hadn't had time to iron it before today. "Next time," Elena said. "See that you do," Nora said. But she was looking at Elena with something in her eyes that had not been there in December. Something that was as close to warmth as Nora Alcott was likely to get with anyone who hadn't lived in the valley for 20 years. And Elena took it for what it was, which was considerable. They drove home in the early afternoon, the three of them on the wagon seat, Lily between them as always. The road was the same road it had always been. The mountains were the same mountains. The frozen creek ran alongside the lower pasture the way it always did, catching what light there was and throwing it back. But something had settled. Something that had been in motion for 3 months, churning and threatening and uncertain, had come to rest, not perfectly, not completely, with much still to be done, and the banking commission inquiry still ahead, and the ranch still in need of everything a ranch always needs. The ground was theirs. The water was theirs. The thing Crow had built in the dark, clause by clause, patient and deliberate and slow, it had been brought into the light, and in the light it had not held. Lily fell asleep against Elena's shoulder, somewhere past the Alcott property, the same way she had after the first hearing. Her head was heavy and warm. Elena put her arm around her without thinking about it, the way you do a thing that has become natural before you noticed it becoming so. Elias watched the road. After a while he said, "The north fence needs work before April." "I know," she said, "and the east pasture wants seeding if the ground thaws early." "I know. We should look at the cattle numbers. See what we can realistically run this season, given the—" "Elias," she said. He stopped. "There's time for all of that," she said. "Tomorrow." He was quiet for a moment. "Then yeah," he said. "Tomorrow." The rest of the way home, in the particular silence of people who have run a long, hard distance together and have come for the moment to a place where they can stop. The north fence took 3 weeks to fix properly. That was the real measure of things returning to something like ordinary, not the ruling, not the ride home from Gallatin Crossing, but the mornings that followed where the work was just work again. No letters from Garrett. No riders at the property line. No documents to analyze at the kitchen table after Lily went to sleep. Just the fence, and the east pasture, and the cattle count, and the 100 ordinary demands of a ranch in early spring that doesn't care what you've been through and requires what it requires regardless. Elias worked the fence, and Elena worked beside him, and they didn't talk much while they worked because they didn't need to. That was one of the things that had changed without either of them, marking exactly when it changed. The silence between them had become a different kind of silence. Not the careful silence of two people navigating around each other's edges, but the easier silence of people who have been through enough together that they don't need to fill the space. Lily brought them coffee at mid-morning on the second day. She walked out across the frozen ground with both cups held carefully in front of her, concentrating on not spilling, and handed one to each of them with the solemn satisfaction of someone completing an important task. "Mrs. Henderson sent a pie," she said. Elias looked up. "What kind?" "Apple," Lily said. "She said it was for winning." "Tell her thank you," he said. "I already did," Lily said, with the faint impatience of a child whose parent has suggested she might not have done the obvious thing. She went back to the cabin. Elias watched her go with an expression Elena had come to recognize, not the almost smile, something fuller than that, something that sat openly on his face the way things had begun to sit more openly since March 3rd. "She's different," Elena said. "Then what?" "Then when I came," Elena said. "Talked to me on the platform because she needed something. Now she talks because she wants to." He looked at Elena. "You noticed that months ago," she said. "I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure it was mine to say." He was quiet for a moment, turning that over. "And now? Now I think it might be," she said. He held her gaze for a moment with the directness he'd been allowing himself more of, the kind that cost him something but that he'd been paying more willingly. Then he looked back at the fence post he was setting and drove it with 2 measured strikes of the post pounder and said, "We should talk tonight, after Lily's asleep." "All right," she said. They worked the rest of the morning without returning to it. The Banking Commission inquiry moved slowly. The way institutional processes move when the institution being investigated has spent 30 years building relationships with the people doing the investigating. But it moved. Stokes sent word in late March that the commission had formally requested Crow's complete loan portfolio, every note, every modification, every filed document going back to the bank's founding. It was a sweeping request, and Garrett had filed 2 motions to limit its scope, and both had been denied. The commission examiner who'd been assigned to the case was a woman from the Helena office named Dora Pitts, who had the reputation, according to Stokes, of being thorough to a degree that made bank principals physically uncomfortable. Elias read Stokes's letter at the table and handed it to Elena. Dora Pitts, he said. I've heard the name, she said. She'd encountered it in the commission records in Helena, attached to 2 previous inquiries that had resulted in license revocations. She's good at her work. Crow's going to try to settle, Elias said. Probably, she said, with everyone, not just us. He looked at her. How many properties do you think had the clause? She had thought about this. I found 5 with certainty, she said. I suspect more. The commission will find all of them now. He sat with this. Outside, the late March wind was doing something different from the February wind, still cold but moving differently. The air carrying something that wasn't warmth yet, but was the memory of warmth, the promise of it. He built it over years, Elias said, inserting those clauses one by one, waiting. He needed a triggering event each time, Elena said, and he was patient enough to wait for one. She paused. He might have waited years for hours. If Caroline Marsh had come as arranged, he'd have had no trigger. He was relying on something going wrong in the household. And something did, Elias said. Just not the way he anticipated. She looked at him. No, she said, not the way he anticipated. They sat with the particular quiet of 2 people who understand that they are both thinking about the same chain of accidents Caroline Marsh frightened in Fargo. A ticket left at a counter, a woman with $14 and nowhere to go, child who reached for a stranger's hand because she needed something and didn't know any better way to ask for it. Lily saved us, Elias said. It came out like something he'd been carrying and needed to put down. She gave us time, Elena said. You saved the rest. I brought a stranger home, he said. That's not the same as saving anything. You chose to stand beside her when Crow pushed, Elena said. That morning at the fence with Patterson. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, he said. I'd already decided by then. She looked at him. When? He thought about it. When you fixed the chimney baffle, he said. The first night. She stared at him. That's a strange moment to decide something. It was practical, he said. It meant you were going to be useful to have around. Something moved in his face. That was what I told myself anyway. She almost laughed. Not a polished laugh, something more surprised, more real. He looked at her as if that sound was something he'd been hoping to hear for a while and hadn't been sure he would. Cornbread too, he said. That probably helped. Your cornbread was genuinely bad, she said. I know, he said. I was compensating in other areas. This time she did laugh, and he watched it happen with an expression that he didn't try to compose or contain. Victor Crow resigned his position as principal of Black Pine Valley Bank in April. He didn't announce it. He filed the paperwork with the commission quietly, and the news moved through the valley the way all news moved on horseback, through windows, across counters. By the time most people heard it, Crow had already transferred his primary residence to somewhere east of Helena. Patterson had resigned 2 weeks earlier. The bank itself was placed under commission oversight, pending a full audit. Elias heard about it from Ruford, who came by on a Tuesday with the news and the expression of a man who wasn't sure how to feel about something he'd been wanting for a long time. It's done then, Ruford said. The inquiry isn't done, Elias said. It'll take months. But he's gone, Elias said. They stood at the fence, the north fence, now properly repaired, and looked at nothing in particular for a moment. Henderson's going to be all right, Ruford said. The commission's reviewing his note along with the others. Clause is being struck from any contract where it appears, without documented borrower acknowledgement. All of them, Elias said. Every one they've found, Ruford said. 6 so far, not counting yours, he left. Elias came inside and found Elena at the table with the ranch ledger and told her. She put her pen down and sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. 6, she said. 6, he said. There are probably more, she said. Ones where the trigger was never used. Where people are still carrying the clause without knowing it. Commission will find them, he said. Yes, she said. She looked at the ledger, eventually. Elena. He sat down across from her. It's done enough for now. She looked at him. She knew what he meant, not that everything was resolved. because things were never resolved as cleanly as you wanted them to be, but that the particular battle they had fought was finished, and there was a difference between keeping watch and standing guard over something that no longer needed guarding. "You're right," she said. "I'm occasionally right," he said. "Don't get used to it." She looked at him with an expression he'd been learning to read, not the neutral face she used when she was processing something, not the working face she had when she was moving through a problem. Something more unguarded than those. Something that had been appearing more frequently in the weeks since the hearing, and that he'd been careful not to make a large thing of because she was someone who moved at her own pace, and he understood that the way he understood the ranch, you didn't push it, you worked with it. "Tonight," he said, after Lily's asleep, "I need to finish what I started to say a few weeks ago." "The fence conversation," she said. "We never got to the actual conversation," he said. "No," she said, "we ran out of light." He looked at her steadily. "Tonight we don't run out of light," he said. "I'll put more wood on." Lily went to sleep at her usual hour, which was later than it used to be. She'd started staying up to read by lamplight, a habit Elena had encouraged by producing a second lamp from somewhere in the depths of the barn storage and cleaning it and placing it by Lily's bunk. She read until her eyes gave out, which lately was around 9 o'clock, and then she slept with the book still in her hand. Elena checked on her at 9:30. The book was on the floor. She picked it up, put it on the small shelf that now held 6 books, 3 of them gifts. One from Vera Halverson, one from Clara Boone, one that had appeared from Nora Alcott, with no note attached and no acknowledgement that she'd given it. Lily had kept them in order of when they arrived, which Elena found quietly moving. Came back to the main room. Elias had built the fire up the way he'd said he would. He was at the table with 2 cups of coffee, and the expression of a man who had been thinking about what he was going to say, and was now uncertain whether any of it was going to come out the way he intended. She sat across from him. She picked up the coffee. "Say it," she said. He looked at her. "I haven't figured out how to say it right." "Then say it wrong," she said. "I've heard you say things wrong before. I'm still here." He almost smiled. Then he let himself. "That's the point," he said. "That you're still here." She waited. "I've been trying to figure out what I owe you," he said. "And I keep running into the problem that the word owe is wrong. You don't owe people things like this. It's not a ledger." "No," she said. "You came here because you had nowhere else," he said. "That's what you told me on the platform." "That's still true." "I know it's still true. It's less true than it was," she said. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I have Portland," she said. "My sister is still there. I have the commission inquiry. Dora Pitts asked me last week if I'd be willing to consult on the document review, given my experience with the notes." She paused. "I have options now that I didn't have in November." He was very still. I'm telling you they exist," she said. "I'm not telling you I'm using them." He breathed. "All right. I'm telling you, because I don't want to stay here the wrong way," she said. "I don't want you to think I'm here because I have nowhere else. I want you to know I'm here because this is where I choose to be." She looked at him directly, the way she looked at things she needed to be honest about, if that's what you're asking. "Whether I'm staying because I have to or because I want to." He looked at her for a long moment. The fire moved. The cabin was warm and quiet, and the wind outside had the particular sound of April wind, different from winter, working in a different key. "I'm asking," he said, "if you'd be willing to stay as something more than what you've been, more than what I've been," she said. "You've been everything," he said. And the plainness of it, the absence of performance in it, was what made it land the way it did. "You've been the ranch and the legal case and Lily's mother in everything but name. I'm asking if you'd be willing to have the name too." She looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at documents she needed to read carefully, not suspicious, not closed, just taking in all of what was there. "You're not a simple man," she said. "No," he said. "You're still figuring out how to be without Margaret," she said. "I know that. You know I know it." "Yes," he said. "I'm not pretending otherwise. And I'm not a simple woman," she said. "I have habits from a life that wasn't easy. I don't say things I don't mean, and I don't soften things I think are true, and sometimes that is not easy to be around." "I've noticed," he said. "I haven't asked you to change it." "No," she said. "You haven't." They sat with that. The fire settled. Somewhere outside an owl did what owls do in April in Montana, which is assert itself in the dark. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," she said again. "That's my answer." Something happened in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the restrained thing, not the managed thing. Something that came from somewhere real, that he let happen without stopping it. He said. His voice was not entirely steady. and he didn't try to make it so. All right. They were married in May. On a Saturday, at the Gallatin Crossing Courthouse with Judge Alderman's clerk officiating, because the circuit preacher wasn't due until June, and neither of them wanted to wait that long, and neither of them needed ceremony more than they needed the thing itself. Vera Halverson came. Owen Henderson came with his wife and 2 of his 5 children. Clara Boone came and wore her good dress and cried a little, which she would have denied if asked. Ruford came and stood in the back with his hat in his hands, and nodded once when they were pronounced married as if the outcome had been confirmed rather than achieved. Nora Alcott came. She did not cry. She did examine Elena's dress, a good wool dress in dark blue that Elena had made herself from fabric. Vera had quietly sent over 3 weeks before with no note, because Vera had learned that Elena was more comfortable receiving things when no one made an occasion of it. Nora looked at the stitching on the collar for a long moment and then said, "That's decent work," which from Nora Alcott in a courtroom full of witnesses was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Lily stood beside Elena during the ceremony and held her hand and did not say anything and did not need to. Afterward, outside in the May sun, actual sun, warm enough to mean it, Lily looked up at Elena and said, "Do I call you something different now?" Elena looked down at her. "What would you like to call me?" Lily thought about it seriously. "Mama feels like it belongs to someone else," she said. "Does," Elena said. "And that's all right. Could I just call you Elena?" Lily said. "Mean Mama?" Elena looked at this girl, this child, who had lost her mother and spent 3 years being careful and quiet, and who had reached for a stranger's hand on a platform because she was 7 years old and needed something, and had not yet learned to stop herself from needing, who had told a court the truth no document could deny, who read by lamplight and kept her books in order and checked the calf's water every morning without being reminded. "Yes," Elena said. "That's exactly right." Lily nodded. She held Elena's hand for another moment, then let go, because there were Henderson children to run with, and the May grass was long enough to be interesting, and she was 8 years old, and the world had opened back up, and she went. There are things you understand about a life only after you've lived enough of it to see the shape of it from a small distance. Elena Whitmore, she took the name. She had chosen this place, understood some of them that summer. Working the east pasture in the long light of Montana June, with the mountains doing what Montana mountains do in June, which is make everything else feel correctly small. She understood that the things she'd thought were misfortunes, the warehouse closing, the money gone, train ticket that was someone else's, and the platform in Gallatin Crossing, where she'd told a stranger the hard truth because she'd thought he deserved it. None of those had been a plan. There had been no plan. There had been one honest decision at a time, made with what she had, and the accumulation of those decisions had brought her here. She understood that Elias was not easy. He held things too long and said them too briefly and sometimes went quiet in the evenings, in a way that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with a woman who was 3 years gone. And she did not take it personally, because she was not a person who confused someone else's grief with her own failure. She had her own things she held too long. She had the particular armor of someone who had learned self-sufficiency too young and sometimes forgot to take it off indoors. They were working on it, both of them, in the way of people who have agreed to try, without agreeing to be perfect at it. She understood that Victor Crow had not been defeated by the law exactly, or not only by it. He'd been defeated by the thing he had failed to account for, that people who are told they are alone sometimes find each other, that the private fears he'd counted on to keep people separate had turned, when someone finally named them out loud, into something shared, and shared things have a different weight than private ones. He'd built his network on isolation. The isolation had not held. The Banking Commission inquiry ran through the summer and into the fall. Dora Pitts was as thorough as her reputation suggested. 9 properties in Black Pine Valley had the clause. 8 of them had it struck. The 9th, the Halverson property, Vera had already paid off by August, using money from a land sale on her north parcel that she'd been putting off for 2 years and finally decided she didn't need to keep putting off. She told Elena about it over coffee on a Tuesday in September, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting a completed chore. "You don't have to be that kind of afraid anymore," Elena said. "I know," Vera said. "That's why I did it." Black Pine Valley Bank was reorganized under new management in October and renamed Gallatin Valley Lending, which was not a particularly inspired name but was at least honest about its geography. The new manager was a young man from Billings who was earnest and not yet corrupted, and whether he would stay that way was the kind of thing you couldn't know in advance but could watch for. Elias watched for it. It was the kind of thing he did now, paid attention, kept the loan documents in a proper file, read what he signed. He was not a different man from the one who'd signed Crow's contract in February 1887, 3 weeks after his wife died, too grief-struck to read carefully. He was the same man, just with the knowledge of what not reading carefully could cost. In November, a year after Elena had stepped off the train at Gallatin Crossing with $14 and a trunk, Lily found her sitting on the porch steps in the early evening. It was the first genuinely cold evening of the season, the first one with the real bite in it, the kind that reminded you winter was not being polite but just gathering itself. Elena had her coat on but was sitting in it, rather than going inside, looking at the mountains going dark above the pine line. Lily sat beside her without asking. They sat there for a while. Cold was the kind that you stopped noticing after a few minutes, or decided to stop noticing, which comes to the same thing. Do you ever think about the train? Lily said. Sometimes, Elena said. Do you think about what would have happened if you'd stayed on it? Elena thought about Portland, her sister's house. A life that would have been decent, probably. Not this. Yes, she said. Are you glad you got off? Lily said. Elena looked at the mountains. The question deserved the honest answer, not the comfortable one. Getting off was the scariest thing I'd done in years, she said. And yes, I'm glad. Lily was quiet for a moment. I'm glad too, she said. In case you wanted to know. I wanted to know, Elena said. Lily leaned her head against Elena's arm. She was almost 9 now, and she'd grown 1.5 inches since November, and her hair, which Elena braided every morning before school, was longer than it had been and required more patience at the tangles, which Lily bore with the stoic acceptance of someone who has decided the end result is worth the process. What made you decide? To stay, really. Elena thought about how to answer this honestly to a child who was old enough to deserve honesty. I'd spent a long time going places because I had to, she said. The farm, the office in St. Paul, the warehouse. Always because something pushed me. She paused. And then I was on a platform, and there was a man who needed to hear something hard, and I could have kept going and sent a letter in 6 weeks. But I got off the train because it was the right thing to do, not because I had to. And then Lily said, and then you took my hand, Elena said, and your father picked up my trunk, and the right thing turned into the thing I wanted. Lily was quiet, absorbing this. I think that's how things work sometimes, she said, with the particular certainty of a child who has arrived at something true by a shorter road than the adults. Sometimes, Elena said, not always, but sometimes. Elias came to the porch door and looked out at them. He looked at his daughter and his wife on the steps in the cold and did not say anything for a moment. Just looked. Supper's going to burn, he said. It won't, Elena said. I put it on low. I can smell it from here. She stood up. Lily stood up. They went inside, the 3 of them, into the warmth of the cabin that had a working chimney baffle and a 3rd chair now, and 7 books on the shelf by Lily's bunk and 2 lamps, and the accumulated evidence of a life that had been built, piece by piece, out of the material that was available, which was not perfect material, and not chosen material, but material that had turned out to be enough. The fire was good. The supper was not burned. The evening came down over Black Pine Valley the way evenings come in late fall, fast and complete. The dark settling into the mountains, and then down through the trees and across the frozen ground until the only light was the light you'd made yourself. Outside, the eastern creek ran the way it always had, and always would, following its course, joined by the tributary north of the Halverson place, moving through the valley that had tried to take it and failed. The water didn't know anything about what had been fought over it. It just ran the way water does, finding the way through that was always there, patient and persistent and entirely itself. Some things Elena had come to understand are not about luck or planning or even courage in the large dramatic sense. They are about the willingness to do the next honest thing when the next honest thing is in front of you. To tell the truth to a stranger on a platform. To fix a chimney baffle when it needs fixing. To ride to Helena in January because the documents are there and you know how to read them. To stay when staying is real and go when going is real and know the difference between the two. She had not arrived in Black Pine Valley looking for this. She had arrived with $14 and a trunk and nowhere else to go. But she had arrived honest, and she had stayed honest, and it had been enough, more than enough, to make something that would outlast the winter. And the next winter, and whatever came after that, Lily asked for seconds. Elias burned his tongue on the coffee the way he always did, because he never waited long enough. Elena watched them both across the table and felt the specific and unspectacular warmth of a life that was hers, chosen and real, imperfect and sufficient, in a cabin in Montana at the edge of the frontier, where the sky, when you stepped outside and looked up, still went on in every direction without an end in sight.